So this is a big book meeting, and we're going to start the big book, and we're going to go all the way to, I guess we'll go all the way out to Dr. Bob's Nightmare, maybe AA number 3 too, the second of the personal stories in the back there. How we're going to do it is we're just going to read. I'm going to read and try to narrate a little bit. And we'll go till about, 5 minutes after, and then we'll open up the floor for open discussion. And I don't know, I've been to meetings where they do nothing but read the book, and it's hard for me to stay glued to it most of the time. Just keep my attention on the reading. Anyway, the preface. This is page XI in the 3rd edition, which is the one that I have. I think the 4th edition is the most recent, right? Yeah, the 4th edition. Anyway, this is the 3rd edition of the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. I guess if you have one of those newer books, you can just put 4th in there instead of 3rd. Alcoholics Anonymous. The 1st edition appeared in April 1939, and in the following 16 years, more than 300,000 copies went into circulation. The 2nd edition, published in 1955, reached a total of more than 1,150,000 copies. Because this book has become the basic text for our society, and that's one of my favorite words for the big book, is the basic text. It's our textbook. And that's, not many people know that either. Not many people know that the big book is the directions for the steps. How many times, I didn't know that for several years. I thought it was the 12 and 12, and the 12 and 12 always confused the hell out of me, so it wasn't until I had a couple of years of sobriety till somebody had actually showed it to me that the steps were in the big book. And has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists a sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. Therefore, the first portion of this volume, describing the AA recovery program, or the 12 steps, has been left untouched in the course of revisions made for both the 2nd and 3rd editions and the 4th edition. I guess you could put that in there. The section called The Doctor's Opinion has been kept intact just as it was originally written in 1939 by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, our society's great medical benefactor. The 2nd edition added the appendices, the 12 traditions, and the directions for getting in touch with AA, but the chief change was in the section of personal stories, which was expanded to reflect the fellowship's growth. Bill's story, Dr. Bob's Nightmare, and one other personal history from the 1st edition were retained intact. 3 were edited, and one of these was retitled. New versions of 2 stories were written with new titles. 30 completely new stories were added, and the story section was divided into 3 parts, under the same headings that are used now. In this, the 3rd edition, Part 1, Pioneers of AA, stands unchanged. 9 of the stories, Part 2, They Stopped in Time, and carried over from the 2nd edition. 8 new stories have been added. In part 3, they lost nearly all. 8 stories have been retained. 5 are new. All changes made over the years in the Big Book, AA members' fond name for this volume, have had the same purpose: to represent the current membership of Alcoholics Anonymous more accurately, and thereby to reach more alcoholics. If you have a drinking problem, we hope that you may pause in reading one of the 44 personal stories and think, yes, that happened to me, or more important, yes, I feel like that, or most important, yes, I believe this program can work for me too. I don't know how similar that is. Maybe I should have read the newer one. Was it different in that book that you guys have? Was it? Yeah. Well, the foreword is probably the same. This is the foreword to the 1st edition, the foreword to the 2nd edition, and I may have to read the foreword to the 4th edition out of this other book over here. Foreword to the 1st edition. This is the foreword as it appeared in the first printing of the 1st edition in 1939. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Now, there's a couple of things there, where he says we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women, and the idea that we have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Just to throw in my 2 cents there, a lot of people, they read into the steps where they say we in there a lot, and I think where it's coming from is from the halfway houses and the detoxes, because I noticed that a lot of these other outside influences like Hazelton, or they tend to shy away from the spiritual aspect and the God thing, you know. So there's a lot of that. They call it a we program thing, you know, and there's a lot of emphasis on getting other people's phone numbers and on keeping in touch with other people, when they don't throw that added part in there and say, so that these people can explain the steps to you and a path that you can get to God, you know, this program of spiritual solutions that we have. And there was a big misconception when I got sober that somehow the we part, everywhere you read in this book where it says we, you know, the first, not we of Alcoholics Anonymous, but and how it works, you know, we admitted we were powerless, and many times throughout the book he says we. And one of the things I've learned over the years was to interpret that we as what was being dictated by the first 100 people to me or to you or to us. Whenever we see we in here, he says we of Alcoholics Anonymous, they're talking about the people who wrote this book. There was like 100 people. There was probably, the way I read it, there was a few of the people with more time, like 5 or 6 or 8 of them, who had helped Bill co-write the big book, so to speak. From what I understand, Bill wrote it, and they just edited a little bit and said, change this, change that, you know. But it's largely the same as he wrote it. But anyway, just to get that out there, I think that there is a big emphasis on you know, leaning on other people. And in my opinion, that's not what we should be teaching in AA. And this is one of the areas here where he says we of Alcoholics Anonymous, where he explains what it means when they say we throughout the big book and throughout the 12 steps and any of the literature that we read in here is we. It's not so much a we program as it is a you and a God program, and somebody can help you find your way to God program. But they leave that out a lot, you know. They leave the idea that you're going to call other people and somehow that these people are going to help you. They leave the part out where they say work the steps and find God. It's usually just some sort of leaning on another human being thing, you know. But to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. We think this account of our experiences will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person, and besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all. Now, the idea that our way of living has its advantages for all is the idea behind those chapters in the back of the book back there. To the wives, to the employer, the family afterward. All 3 of those chapters, you have to ask yourself, what are those chapters written for? Because basically, when we get out there to those chapters, I'm going to show you where he's explaining to those people that we have basically 3 spiritual solutions in AA. Not many people really refer to these very often. And the only thing that I can come up with myself is that you can't teach something that you don't know. Those 3 spiritual solutions are forgiveness, making amends, and faith in God. And when you get out there to those chapters out there, you're going to find that he's essentially explaining to the wife, to the employer, the family afterward, that they are to forgive the alcoholic, that they are to have faith in God. And there, many times out there, the employer is instructed to help the alcoholic find other alcoholics to work with, that the wife is instructed to help the alcoholic find other alcoholics to work with, and that when we get out there, we'll see that it came from where Alcoholics Anonymous came from, which was from the Oxford groups. And you guys know what the Oxford, I don't know, maybe some of you don't, but the Oxford groups was where Alcoholics Anonymous basically came from. And the Oxford groups didn't work on alcoholics, they worked on everybody. It was Bill who kind of Bill and Bob broke away from the Oxford groups and started working on just alcoholics, because they felt that, the idea behind someone who's already been there, someone who understands, and we can relate to one another, was a very big advantage for the alcoholics at that time. Anyway, it is important that we remain anonymous. This is like the only reference to anonymity in the whole big book right here. If you'll read some of the other literature, Bill Wilson writes that they didn't fully understand the depth of anonymity at this time. were saying that they remain anonymous because they were overwhelmed with pleas for help. But later on, the reason Alcoholics Anonymous, as it grew, they began to know more and more and understand more and more about anonymity. And as he puts it later on, that the spiritual principle behind our anonymity is self-sacrifice. That the reason that it grew into this, it didn't just automatically, they didn't just start off that way. It was later on that they began to see that the anonymity of not going around telling everybody what you're doing for other people, the benefit of that was humility and faith in God, and to do something for somebody else and not run around telling everybody about it. That's what Alcoholics Anonymous is anonymous. Not because we're a secret society, and you have to ask yourself that simple question. What do you think that the basic idea of the underlying reason for anonymity is? Is it fear that someone's going to find out we're going to remain anonymous because we don't want anybody to know that we're in Alcoholics Anonymous? Or is it faith in God, essentially? Faith, because there's two opposite ends of the spectrum for a recovering alcoholic from this point. Well, actually, as we get further into the book, from the recovery standpoint, is that fear is at the root of our alcoholism, and that faith is the spiritual solution to that fear. And that is one of the most basic ideas of recovery. And having seen that, ask yourself the simple question: do you think that our anonymity is based in fear that someone's going to find out that we're in this secret society and we're like, with this bunch of drunks over here or something? Or, do you think that the anonymity is based in something good, like doing things for others and not taking credit for it? He says that the spiritual principle behind our anonymity is self-sacrifice. And the reason we remain anonymous is because the work that we do is for God. That's why Alcoholics Anonymous is anonymous. And that's in some of the other literature that we have, the Comes of Age and the Language of the Heart. But this is the only place in here that he mentions this anonymity. It is important that we remain anonymous because we are too few at present to handle the overwhelming number of personal appeals which may result from this publication. Being mostly business or professional folk, we could not well carry on our occupations in such an event. We would like it understood that our alcoholic work is an avocation. Avocation being like a, what's that? Yeah, an advocation. It's more like a hobby. Yeah. When writing or speaking publicly about alcoholism, we urge each of our fellowship to omit his personal name, designating himself instead as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Very earnestly, we ask the press also to observe this request, for otherwise we shall be greatly handicapped. We are not an organization in the conventional sense of the word. There are no fees or dues whatsoever. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. We are not allied with any particular faith, sect, or denomination, nor do we oppose anyone. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted. We shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book, particularly from those who have commenced to work with other alcoholics. We should like to be helpful to such cases. Inquiry by scientific, medical, or religious societies will be welcome. One of the things he says here, we shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book. If you go back to A Vision for You, like the second to the last page there, 163, 162, there's one of the things he says there is, to me, this is a very important thing. This is the bottom of 162 and the top of 163. He says, thus we grow, and so can you. Though you be but one man with this book in your hand, we believe and hope it contains all you will need to begin. So, where's the sponsor? Where are the AA meetings? Where's all this stuff that you're supposed to have today? He says, though you be but one man with this book in your hand, we believe and hope it contains all you will need to begin. Going back to where we just came from there. We shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book, particularly from those who have commenced work with other alcoholics. So when this book was written, it was designed to be your sponsor and guide through the steps. It was intended that you were going to be in some distant city, in Utah or Oklahoma or something, far away from Akron, Ohio, and New York, where it was written, and someone was going to buy this book at a bookstore or order it on, there wasn't no online, but order it through mail or something, and hand it to somebody, and they were going to understand what they read and get sober. That's what this book was intended. It was intended to be your sponsor and your AA meetings, and many of the people who would get this book were intended to start meetings in their own towns and write back to Alcoholics Anonymous and actually start meetings up without any introduction to AA at all. So just to throw that out there, the whole idea that we're dependent upon the way it is today, Okay, this is a foreword to the second edition. This is one of my favorites here. This is one of my favorite places in the whole book, this foreword to the second edition, because in the foreword to the second edition, it essentially is the story of Dr. Bob and Bill meeting, and Bill's on the edge of a drink. Bill has been sober 6 months. He's on the edge of a drink. He's standing outside of a bar thinking, should I go in and have a drink, or should I go make a phone call to find some alcoholic to help with at the Oxford groups over here in Akron, Ohio? And you'll see that in here, that the fact that he's on the edge of a drink and working with another alcoholic saves him is the idea behind Alcoholics Anonymous. So it's like one of the most basic ideas, one of the most important things that we could learn, and we're going to see that here as we read through this, and I'll slow down and point some of it out here. Since the original foreword to this book was written in 1939, a wholesale miracle has taken place. Our earliest printing voiced the hope that every alcoholic who journeys will find the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at his destination. Already, continues the early text, 2s and 3s and 5s of us have sprung up in other communities. 16 years have elapsed between our first printing of this book and the presentation in 1955 of our second edition. In that brief space, Alcoholics Anonymous has mushroomed into nearly 6,000 groups whose membership is far above 150,000 recovered alcoholics. I'm just guessing that many of those groups were just a result of somebody having this book and somebody being motivated enough. As it puts it out there in that the vision for you, it's only a matter of willingness, whether you pick up the book and start your own meeting and start your own little sobriety community there. Alcoholics Anonymous has mushroomed into nearly 6,000 groups whose membership is far above 150,000 recovered alcoholics. Groups are to be found in each of the United States and all of the provinces of Canada. AA has flourishing communities in the British Isles, the Scandinavian countries, South Africa, South America, Mexico, Alaska, Australia, and Hawaii. All told, promising beginnings have been made in some 50 foreign countries and U.S. possessions. Some are just now taking shape in Asia. Many of our friends encourage us by saying that this is but a beginning, only the augury of a much larger future ahead. The beginning of a much larger future ahead. The spark that was to flare into the first AA group was struck at Akron in June 1935 during a talk between a New York stockbroker and an Akron physician. 6 months earlier, the broker had been relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual experience. So he's saying that 6 months, Bill Wilson has been sober for 6 months. The stockbroker was Bill Wilson, the New York stockbroker, and the Akron physician is Dr. Bob. And this is June of 1935. And when we get to Bill's story, we'll see that Bill had that sudden spiritual awakening, and he thought maybe he was losing his mind, and his doctor said, I've heard of these things before, and he gave him a book. What was the book? Or was that Ebby Thatcher gave him the book? Because Ebby was there at the hospital with him, bouncing in and out of his life at that time. He had been sort of drinking and then staying sober and drinking and staying sober, what you might call relapse. And he had been introduced to the Oxford groups and relapsed, and this guy who was 12-stepping him or 6-stepping him, whatever you want to call it, or 4 absolutes is what they actually had. I guess you'd call it the 4 absoluting him instead of 12-stepping him. Sudden spiritual experience. Following a meeting with an alcoholic friend who had been in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. Now that's Ebby Thatcher. That's Bill Wilson's school, his childhood friend, as he put it. Some guy who was a gutter drunk, absolutely hopeless. You'll see that out in Bill's story. This guy was like, he was a waste case, a lost cause. And I'm sure we all know one of those guys. I've known 2 or 3 of them in my life. outside of AA too, not just in AA. The Oxford groups of that day. He had also been greatly helped by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, a New York specialist in alcoholism, who is now accounted no less than a medical saint by AA members, and whose story of the early days of our society appears in the next pages. From this doctor, the broker had learned the grave nature of alcoholism. Though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups, and what he could not accept about the Oxford groups was their absolutes. They had the absolute purity, absolute honesty, absolute unselfishness, and absolute love. And that's one of the things we claim spiritual progress, not spiritual absolutes, you know. We claim to be growing spiritually towards this idea of what we want to become, instead of one of the reasons I read in one of the other books that they had a lot of failures in the Oxford groups was because they had those absolutes, and if you weren't absolute, then you weren't there, you know, and it was just, oh, the hell with it, give up, you know. But that was one of the tenets that they couldn't go for. Though they could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups, he was convinced of the need for a moral inventory. So there was step 1 up there. He learned of the grave nature of alcoholism. The moral inventory, there's step 4, confession of personal defects. Step 5, restitution to those harmed. That's 8 and 9. Helpfulness to others, step 12. The necessity of belief in and dependence upon God, there's steps 2, 3, 6, 7, and 11. That could be described as those steps. Prior to his journey to Akron, the broker had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic, but he had succeeded only in keeping sober himself. The broker had gone to Akron on a business venture which had collapsed, leaving him greatly in fear that he might start drinking again. He suddenly realized that in order to save himself, he must carry his message to another alcoholic. That alcoholic turned out to be the Akron physician, Dr. Bob. This physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, and Dr. Bob was a member of the Oxford groups in Akron, Ohio. And he had been a member for 2 years, I believe it said. He had been chronic relapse in and out of the Oxford groups for 2 years. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, and one of the things that I read in some of the other literature, you know, one of these days I'm going to research it and I'll remember what book it was and what page it is the longer I'm sober probably. But Bill Wilson had failed to sober anybody up for 6 months, and he had gone back to Dr. Silkworth and said, you know, nobody's getting sober. And Dr. Silkworth said, yeah, but you're speaking down to everybody. You're telling everybody that they need to have this sudden spiritual experience, this white light that you had in your hospital room that night. And that's just the case is that most of us, 90% of the people, have the gradual educated, what they have like 2 different varieties now. The sudden and profound spiritual experience that Bill experienced was like 10% of the people who get sober have that. And it says roughly 90% of the people who get sober have the gradual educated, a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps type experience that we have. But what he was trying to do was induce this in others. He was trying to get other people to have this sudden spiritual awakening, and he was speaking down to people like, look at you down there, you know, pick yourself up, be like me, one of those things, and he was failing. And that's when Dr. Silkworth had explained to Bill Wilson that he needed to stop speaking down to people, and he needed to stop trying to induce this sudden spiritual awakening and to deliver this sledgehammer of the fatal malady, the idea of the obsession that we have for the first drink, coupled with the allergy that sets up once we have that. Once we take that first drink, we give in to the first drink, and then we take the first drink, we cannot stop drinking. So he called it, we don't have a better word for it. I don't like the word allergy either, and I never did, but allergy is the closest thing that we have to describing what it is that happens to us once we take that first drink. So that's what Dr. Silkworth had explained to Bill. Go out there and try this, give him that sledgehammer of the obsession, followed by what a word I was trying to find there again. Yeah, the allergy. So this is the first guy that he tried this with. And strangely enough, the first guy that he tried this on got sober. Dr. Bob here. Let's see. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never before been able to muster. He sobered never to drink again up to the moment of his death in 1950. Now, this is one of my favorite sentences. I like to use this a lot. I like to refer back to this as we work our way through here. It says, this seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. And a lot of the times when I use that little phrase right there, it also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery, is whenever I hear people make reference to, because I say this a lot, when I first got sober, helping others was mentioned in the same breath as pushing in the chairs and emptying the ashtrays and making coffee and cleaning the restrooms and sweeping the floor. And it was like somebody, which one do you want to do? Well, let's see. The hard one is working with other alcoholics. So let's pick one of the easier ones, Let's go with the pushing in the chairs and sweeping the floors and making coffee. And somehow it was put out there that you could do this and still stay sober. And it says here, it also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. If you are going to stay sober and stay sober permanently, this is vital to your future sobriety, that you work with another alcoholic, that you learn how to take people through the steps with this book, and that you see, one of the things that I've learned over the years is that one of the other doctors that Bill Wilson calls one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous was Harry Tiebout, one of the physicians in the back to this book and a lot of the other books that we have. And Harry Tiebout said that basically what's happening to us is that we get an initial ego deflation from alcoholism, and that we get a continued source of ego deflation by bringing others through the 12 steps and bringing them to a God of their understanding. It keeps our ego from restoring its natural place in our lives to try to convince us that we're in charge, that we're running the show, and that we're making the decisions and the calls. And how we keep that ego from restoring itself is by bringing another alcoholic to a power greater than themselves through this book. And this is sort of an acknowledgement, and the way I understand it, it's an acknowledgement to myself, to the people around me, and to God of this world, that I no longer think that I'm in charge of anything if I'm teaching other people that there's a higher power and that they need to find their way to that higher power. It is essentially, as Dr. Silkworth, or not Silkworth, but Harry Tiebout put it, was a continued source of ego deflation. And in my opinion, you can't get ego deflation from submission to God's will. You can't get this from pushing in the chairs, sweeping those things are all great, and nobody should put it down, but don't teach other people that that's a source of continued permanent sobriety, because it will, in my opinion, it will fail you eventually, because this is absolutely vital to permanent recovery. One alcoholic working with another, one-on-one. Hence, the two men set to work almost frantically upon alcoholics. Look what he says, frantically. How many people do you see floating around here going to work on people frantically? Most of them look like they're just hanging out to me. Sometimes I even get the feeling that's what I'm doing here. But I'll explain to you later on how, in my opinion, that one of the easiest ways to get sponsees, and I can do it at any time. I can pick up. If I'm feeling bummed out and I'm feeling down and feeling low, I say, you know what? I go pick up 3 sponsees over to 101 on like Tuesday night or something, and there'll be a room full of kids. And I'll walk in there and say something about God, the steps, spirituality, details. And I'll write down 3 people. Hey, will you sponsor me? Just like that. And I can explain that to other people, too. And, it's just really up to the individual to go out and get these people. But anyway, hence the 2 men set to work almost frantically upon alcoholics arriving at the ward of the Akron City Hospital. Their very first case, a desperate one, recovered immediately and became AA number 3. He never had another drink. That's Bill Dobson, AA number 3, the second story out there in the personal stories. He never had another drink. This work at Akron continued through the summer of 1935. So Bill Wilson was in Akron, Ohio for 3 months and got 4 people sober while he was there for 3 months. That would be Dr. Bob, 3 people. Wait a minute. Dr. Bob, Bill Dobson, and that Devil May Care chap, as it's put in the Vision for You. This work at Akron continued through the summer of 1935. There were many failures, but there was an occasional heartening success. When the broker returned to New York in the fall of 1935, the first AA group had actually been formed. Though no one realized it at the time, by late 1937 the number of members having substantial sobriety time behind them was sufficient to convince the membership that a new light had entered the dark world of the alcoholic. A second small group had promptly taken shape in New York. And besides, there were scattered alcoholics who had picked up the basic ideas in Akron or New York and were trying to form AA groups in other cities. I think the third one was Cleveland. We'll talk about some of that next week. We're going to open up the floor for open discussion tonight. So there we are at the that last paragraph on the bottom of 17. We'll pick up there next week, and we'll work our way out to as far as we can get. The second, I guess, AA number 3 is the second story out there. All right, so facilitate the reading of the big book. Last week we left off on Roman numeral XVII 17 and the foreword. And the format is we're going to read, 2 or 3 pages. I'm going to comment on what I know about AA, and we'll open up the floor for open discussion on either the book or what we're reading or anything you feel like talking about. I'm going to try to gab for about half of the meeting, and we'll open up the floor for the other half of the meeting. And we are down in the middle of that page where it says a second small group had promptly taken shape at New York. And that was Bill Wilson's group. He started at the, I think it was the Knickerbocker Hospital there in New York. And that's where, Bill Wilson called him one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. And his name was Harry Tiebout. He was he was the guy who gave Marty Mann, the first woman who ever got sober, the first draft of the big book. That was at that New York Knickerbocker Hospital. And he was also, when they started the meeting somewhere else after they left the hospital there, Harry Tiebout was the first guy to ever pack a bunch of his drunks into a van and drive them over to the AA meeting. This was back in like 39 or 40. A second small group had promptly taken shape at New York, and besides, there were scattered alcoholics who had picked up the basic ideas in Akron, New York, and were trying to form AA groups in other cities. The third one, I believe, the third most prominent one was Cleveland. It was now time the struggling groups thought to place their message and unique experience before the world. This determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939 by the publication of this volume. The membership had reached about 100 men and women. The fledgling society, which had been nameless, now began to be called Alcoholics Anonymous from the title of its own book. Now remember that Alcoholics Anonymous wasn't the first choice. They had voted on several different names, and Alcoholics Anonymous and A Way Out were the two most popular, and they voted for A Way Out. And at the last minute, somebody was dispatched to the Library of Congress or something, and they went to see if there was another book entitled A Way Out, and there were like 12 of them at the time. So they were like, we're going to be the 13th book called A Way Out, so let's go with Alcoholics Anonymous. And at the last minute, before the printing went on, they changed the name from A Way Out to Alcoholics Anonymous. And there was an argument that took place about writing of the book. And the argument was, I believe the story's in Comes of Age, the argument was that Alcoholics Anonymous was supposed to be one alcoholic working with another. It's the whole idea behind AA, that one alcoholic working with another is how this thing works. So if you write a book about it, and all you got to do now is read the book, then where's that one alcoholic working the other? And the other side of the argument was, if it was one alcoholic working with another, it's going to take 20, 30 years to get to California. Like a handoff from person to person, it's going to take quite it'll get around the world in the 1970s or 80s or something. But the argument won out to write the book. The fledgling society, which had been nameless, now began to be called Alcoholics Anonymous from the title of its own book. The flying blind period ended, and AA entered a new phase of its pioneering time. With the appearance of the new book, a great deal began to happen. Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, the noted clergyman, reviewed it with approval. In the fall of 1939, Fulton Orsler, then editor of Liberty, printed a piece in his magazine called Alcoholics and God. This brought a rush of 800 frantic inquiries into the little New York office, which meanwhile had been established. Each inquiry was painstakingly answered. Pamphlets and books were sent out. Businessmen traveling out of existing groups were referred to these prospective newcomers. New groups started up, and it was found to the astonishment of everyone that AA's message could be transmitted in the mail as well as by word of mouth. By the end of 1939, it was estimated that 800 alcoholics were on their way to recovery. And that Cleveland group was largely responsible for most of those people. It was this next story here about the Jack Alexander story that started the rush primarily to those people in Cleveland there. In the spring of 1940, John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave a dinner for many of his friends, to which he invited AA members to tell their stories. News of this got on the world wires. Inquiries poured in again, and many people went to the bookstores to get the book Alcoholics Anonymous. By March 1941, the membership had shot up to 2,000. Then Jack Alexander wrote a feature article in the Saturday Evening Post and placed such a compelling picture of AA before the general public that alcoholics in need of help really deluged us. Now, that story in the Saturday Evening Post is one of those pamphlets, and when you read it, you know what that story is? Exactly the same story that we're reading in this foreword, that Bill Wilson, he gets sober through the Oxford groups, and it's the same exact story. So it's in the AA, that pamphlet, the Saturday Evening Post, Jack Alexander article. It's here in the foreword. It's in Bill's story, it's in Bob's story, and it's in A Vision for You. Each time it's the same story over and over and over. That when one alcoholic is on the verge of a drink and he's completely defenseless and powerless against that first drink, he reaches out to somebody else and attempts to help somebody else, and it saves the day, and he stays sober. That is Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's why they repeat this story over and over and over again. He didn't make coffee and stay sober. He didn't push in the chairs and stay sober. He gave of his time, gave of himself, and expected nothing in return, and that is the idea behind Alcoholics Anonymous. Numbered 8,000, the mushrooming process was in full swing. AA had become a national institution. Our society then entered a fearsome and exciting adolescent period. The test that it faced was this: could these large numbers of erstwhile erratic alcoholics successfully meet and work together? Would there be quarrels over membership, leadership, and money? Would there be strivings for power and prestige? Would there be schisms which would split AA apart? Soon AA was beset by these very problems on every side and in every group. But out of this frightening and at first disrupting experience, the conviction grew that AA had to hang together or die separately. We had to unify our fellowship or pass off the scene. And you know, one of the things in that pioneering phase is in AA Comes of Age. There's a lot of stuff in there. And you know, you might think that when you're reading AA Comes of Age, you're reading a history of AA, but there's more to it than that. You're reading the history of why we came to the ideas that we have today, like this anonymity thing that we have in Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, many people think that anonymity is based in a secret society that no one knows we're a member of, but it's not, because the whole idea of Alcoholics Anonymous is that faith in God is the path away from the fear that that drives us to that first drink. Essentially, the driving force behind our obsession for the first drink is based in fear, and faith in God is how we combat that. And with that idea of faith versus fear, you have to ask yourself about that idea of anonymity that's floating around, that so many people, it's a misconception. If you will read any of the things on anonymity in Alcoholics Anonymous, the reason Alcoholics Anonymous is because we do things for other people and don't go around telling everybody about it. We don't brag about it because, you see, it cancels out when you do something for somebody else and you don't expect anything in return, no conditions whatsoever. There's a benefit to be had from that. And if you go around bragging about it and telling people about it and showing off, then that cancels out the idea that you did it as a selfless giving act. Now you have tried to receive some kind of notoriety and some kind of payment in the form of, I'm going to brag about it. That's why Alcoholics Anonymous is anonymous. That's why we're anonymous. Not because we're a secret society, because look at the other point of view. That we're anonymous because we don't want anybody to find out that we're a member of this place. Is that based in fear or faith? Is the idea of anonymity fear-based or faith-based? It's a simple question as that. That is the answer to why Alcoholics Anonymous is anonymous. And many people do go around like we're a secret society, but I think it's a simple answer to that question. You don't have to ask yourself. You can read the literature and why. Although they mention anonymity in the big book only one time, and it says our members are too few right now to handle the overwhelming requests that have been thrust upon us. That's why we must remain anonymous. But later, as the years of battling all of this, the growth of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's why that book is entitled "Comes of Age," because it is how we found our way. But anyway. Now, these are the 12 traditions here in this next paragraph. As we discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live, and remember that the whole principles behind the 12 steps is self-sacrifice. That's what Bill Wilson wrote about anonymity. They said, Bill, what's the idea behind anonymity? The spiritual principle behind anonymity was self-sacrifice, and so too are the 12 traditions for the group. The 12 traditions are for the group, how the group is to sacrifice everything that it is for helping the alcoholic. And it can easily be seen. That's why whenever somebody says to me, what's your take on the 12 traditions? It's easy. The 12 traditions are all about sacrifice for the group. The 12 steps are all about sacrifice for the individual, on the idea of this is the path to faith. As we discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live, so we had to evolve the principles by which the AA groups and AA as a whole could survive and function effectively. It was thought that no alcoholic man or woman could be excluded from our society. That's like tradition 3, right? That our leaders might serve but not govern, that each group was to be autonomous, and that there was to be no professional class of therapy. There were to be no fees or dues. Our expenses were to be met by our own voluntary contributions. There was to be the least possible organization. Even in our service centers, our public relations were to be based upon attraction rather than promotion. It was decided that all members ought to be anonymous at the level of press, radio, TV, and films. So, that's one of the things when Bill Wilson take on anonymity was pages of descriptions and explanations. But Dr. Bob's was one paragraph, and it was brief, precise, and to the point. When they asked Dr. Bob, why is Alcoholics Anonymous anonymous, Dr. Bob said, anonymity is meant to be kept in one place and one place only, at the level of press, radio, and films. Not above the level of press, radio, and films, and not below the level of press, radio, and films, but at and only at the level of press, radio, and films. Nowhere else. That's that simple. And when you see people coming around here going, oh, you broke my anonymity because I was in the hallway and you said my name or something, you can see how easily that's misconstrued. They don't understand fully why we remain anonymous. And you see why we remain anonymous at the level of press, radio, and films is because we're not seeking the notoriety. We're not seeking the fame, the payment, the bragging rights of doing something for somebody else. And in no circumstances should we give endorsements, make alliances, or enter public controversies. There's a lot of explanations about how he came to these in some of the other literature over there. This was the substance of AA's 12 traditions, which are stated in full on page 564 of this book. Though none of these principles had the force of rules or laws, they had become so widely accepted by 1950 that they were confirmed by our first international conference held at Cleveland. You see where he's saying there that the first international conference of Alcoholics Anonymous was held in Cleveland, because Cleveland was one of the largest groups. It outpaced New York and Akron combined. It was literally exploded in Cleveland. And there was a reason for that, and that reason was that in the Cleveland groups they were assigning sponsees. In the New York and the Akron groups, they were just sort of, when people hooked up, they hooked up. But as people walked in the door and they were so overwhelmed in Cleveland, the story goes that all you needed was 2 weeks of sobriety and to be ahead of the person that you were sponsoring, because the people were coming in so fast and furious that they would just say, okay, you got 2 weeks, you got on step 2 or 3, you help this guy who's coming in the door. Today, the remarkable unity of AA is one of the greatest assets that our society has. While the internal difficulties of our adolescent period was being ironed out, public acceptance of AA grew by leaps and bounds. For this, there were two principal reasons: the large numbers of recoveries and reunited homes. These made their impressions everywhere. Of alcoholics, now this is I know that this was written in 1939, or it's a foreword to the second edition, right? Yeah, 1955. Figures given in this foreword describe the fellowship as it was in 1955. Okay. So this is 75, almost 80% of the people who walk into AA get sober and stay sober. But there is a little, you see, because today, even when I got sober, I heard 3% of the people in here are going to make it. Look around you, only 3%. And I thought, oh, that's pretty sad, you know. But if you look here, they're talking 80% of the people who come in that door stay sober for the rest of their lives. But there's a little part here you got to pay attention to, and he says really tried. There's a big difference between people who come in here and sit in the back of the room, disruptive, they answer their phone, they come in late, leave early, hit on the women, hit on the men, whatever. They're not really into it, you know, they're just sort of hanging out. And it says really tried here. It doesn't say people who came in and just, you know, hung out. Of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. 25% sobered up after some relapses, and among the remainder, those who stayed on with AA showed improvement. Other thousands came to a few AA meetings and at first decided they didn't want the program, but great numbers of these, about 2 out of 3, began to return as time passed. That could almost be higher than 80%, if you ask me. But there is that stipulation there, really tried. Don't forget that. It's a big difference between people who come in here and really try and people who just come in and sit down and hang out. Sorry. Number 2, another reason for the wide acceptance of AA was the ministration of friends in medicine, religion, and the press, together with innumerable others who became our able and persistent advocates. Without such support, AA could have made only the slowest progress. Some of the recommendations of AA's early medical and religious friends will be found further on in this book. Alcoholics Anonymous is not a religious organization. Neither does AA take any particular medical point of view, though we cooperate widely with the men of medicine as well as the men of religion. Alcohol being no respecter of persons, we are an accurate cross-section of America and in distant lands. The same democratic evening up process is now going on by personal religious affiliation. We include Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Hindus, and a sprinkling of Muslims and Buddhists. Does that say M-O-S, Muslims? I thought it was M-U-S. Yeah. More than 15% of us are women. At present, our membership is increasing at the rate of about 7% a year. So far, upon the total problem of several million actual and potential alcoholics in the world, we have made only a scratch. In all probability, we shall never be able to touch more than a fair fraction of the alcohol problem and all its ramifications. Upon therapy for the alcoholic himself, we surely have no monopoly, yet it is our great hope that all these who have as yet found no answer may begin to find one in the pages of this book and will presently join us on the high road to a new freedom. All right, this is the foreword to the third edition. It's a short one. This is one page here. By March 1976, when this edition went to the printer, so I'm guessing this foreword was written in 76, the total worldwide membership of Alcoholics Anonymous was conservatively estimated at more than 1 million, with almost 28,000 groups meeting in over 90 countries. Surveys of groups in the United States and Canada indicate that AA is reaching out not only to more and more people, but to a wider and wider range. Women now make up more than 1/4 of the membership. Among newer members, the proportion is nearly one-third. 7% of the AAs surveyed are less than 30 years of age, among them many in their teens. The basic principles of the AA program, it appears, hold good for individuals with many different lifestyles, just as the program has brought recovery to those of many different nationalities. The 12 steps that summarize the program may be called Los Dos Pasos in one country, Los Dos Etapas in another, but they trace exactly the same path to recovery that was blazed by the earliest members of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, one of my favorite parts of this book is out in More About Alcohol. No, there is a solution. Yeah, More About Alcoholism is step 1. This is there is a solution, and it's a story about how it's just a paragraph about how we all have the exact same program of recovery. If I can find the damn thing. This is on page 17, the first page of There is a Solution, at the bottom, that one paragraph there. You know, he was just mentioning that no matter what country you're in, that it's the same basic principles. And this, when you read what Bill Wilson writes, he uses very profound words when he's writing stuff like this. He uses a definite, something that you can't, squeeze out of. And he says here, the tremendous fact for every one of us. Now think about that for a minute. The tremendous fact. That's a pretty, definitive statement there. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. A common solution means it's for every one of us, it's the exact same thing, okay? And I got to tell you, when I got sober, there was like a movement going on in AA. My sobriety date is August 17th, 1990, which is next month will be 20 years. And when I got sober, there was a big movement in AA that the 12 steps had many different aspects. And if you could ask 10 different people how to work the steps and come up with 10 different ways, that there was no set way of working it. And I actually thought that for some time until I came across this book and some of the people who knew this book. He says, we have a way out on which we can absolutely agree upon and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. The tremendous fact is that we have discovered a common solution. It is exactly the same. I hate to say it, but I've run into some women's meetings, not women's meetings, but a meeting run by a woman who was doing the 12 and 12 or the big book or something, and for some reason I got the idea that women think that this program is different for them, that it has something to do with emotions and feelings and somehow getting out. One particular woman who was real popular here for many years, I have a lot of her stuff in my 12 and 12 highlight, and I got to tell you, it was so far off base that I have agreed to sponsor women over the years. I've sponsored several women, and I tell them there's a reason why I sponsor women, to try to set the record straight that it's the same program for men as it is for women, that anger and fear and guilt are those 3 most common forms of self that block us from God, and that is the Alcoholics Anonymous program. It has nothing to do with... It has to do with what's blocking me from God and service to others, and the 3 spiritual solutions that we have. When we'll get into those spiritual solutions when we get further on in the book, that they're very precise, there's action involved, and the details are in there. You just have to slow down and pay attention to the words instead of breezing through it so fast, which I did for many years myself. They'd say, somebody'd say, hey, go read this page, and I'd read it and come back and go, I didn't see a damn thing. And then they'd slow me down and say, look what it says. It tells you exactly that you're looking to find what's blocking you from God. It's not about feelings. It's not about emotions. It's about selfishness and selflessness. All right. In spite of the great increase in the size and the span of this fellowship, I'm back in the foreword to the 3rd edition here. At its core, it remains simple and personal. Simple and personal. That's one of the things that's helped me the most in my sobriety, is somebody who could simplify this, because for some reason I got the idea that it was complicated. And I'll tell you where I got it from was those words he uses in step 4 where it says, a searching and fearless moral inventory had me stumped. I had no idea what that meant. scratch my head. I didn't have the humility to raise my hand and say, will somebody tell me what a searching and fearless moral inventory is? And chances are, if I did, some moron would come up with some kind of spiritual calculus, as is put, some kind of complicated explanation of it. When the searching and fearless moral inventory is really a search to find what's blocking me from God, and what's blocking me from God are the most common manifestations of self that block me from a life of self-sacrifice and service to others, which is what we think God wants us to do. That is the fourth step. It's not, I always thought it was some kind of real complicated, but anyway, at its core it remains simple and personal. Each day, somewhere in the world, recovery begins when one alcoholic talks with another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength, and hope. All right, so a couple more minutes, we'll read into the doctor's opinion a little bit, and there's like two doctor's opinions here. One of them's a brief, like half a page deal here, and then he goes on to write another, 4 pages on the, four pages after that. He expands on it. What's that, Chief? Oh, well, I guess I'm going to have to find another book. Forward to the 4th edition. Okay. So we get a page and a half. This 4th edition of Alcoholics Anonymous came off the press in November 2001, at the start of the new millennium. Since the 3rd edition was published in 1976, worldwide membership of AA has just about doubled to an estimated 2 million or more, with nearly 100,800 groups meeting in approximately 150 countries around the world. Literature has played a major role in AA's growth, and a striking phenomenon of the past quarter century has been the explosion of translations of our basic literature into many languages and dialects. In country after country where the AA seed was planted, it has taken root, slowly at first, then growing by leaps and bounds when literature has become available. Currently, Alcoholics Anonymous has been translated into 43 languages. As the message of recovery has reached larger numbers of people, it has also touched the lives of a vastly greater variety of suffering alcoholics. When the phrase, "we are people who normally would not mix," page 17 of this book, was written in 1939, it referred to a fellowship composed largely of men and a few women with quite similar social, ethnic, and economic backgrounds. Like so much of AA's basic text, these words have proved to be far more visionary than the founding members could have ever imagined. So you see where he's saying that there's something very profound was just that one sentence, that we're normally men and women who would not mix. And that's the way a lot of this book is. It's very condensed. It's very, when you read a sentence and you breeze through it so fast that you don't even stop to think about what it means, that's what I did for years before I slowed down and started paying attention. With the help of somebody else, I might add. It wasn't something I did voluntarily. I didn't know there were larger answers in this book than just the simple stuff that I was looking for. The stories added to this edition represent a membership whose characteristics of age, gender, race, and culture have widened and have deepened to encompass virtually everyone the first 100 members could have hoped to reach. While our literature has preserved the integrity of the AA message, sweeping changes in society as a whole are reflected in new customs and practices within the fellowship. Taking advantage of technological advances, for example, AA members with computers can participate in meetings online, sharing with fellow alcoholics across the country and around the world. In any meeting anywhere, AAs share experience, strength, and hope with each other in order to stay sober and to help other alcoholics, modem to modem or face to face. Well, that's old itself, huh? When's the last time you saw a modem? AAs speak the language of the heart, and it's all power and simplicity, and all its power and simplicity. So, although the anonymity deal is press, radio, and films, they're still having online meetings here. I guess as long as you don't show... There's a list of things that break anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films, and one of them is a combination of your face and your name, and your first name and your last name, or any combination thereof. You can show your face and just say your first name or a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, but the list is in one of those pamphlets, and there's as long as you don't have your face and your name together, then you're not breaking your anonymity. We'll open up the meeting for 25 minutes for open discussion, and next week we'll begin the doctor's opinion. There are like two doctor's opinions, I guess. The first one's a little short one, and then they asked him to expand on it to help. And in the doctor's opinion, we have the 5 types of alcoholics that are, out in the chapter to wives is where Bill Wilson actually writes what the 4 types, I believe, out there. There are 4 types of alcoholics in the chapter to wives, and he also addresses in the chapter to wives how to approach each one of these types of alcoholics when you're trying to help them. So all those chapters out there in the back are very important. There's a lot of stuff out there. But the doctor actually has like 5 types. I believe one of his types is the mentally ill person. That's why he has 5 and Bill has 4. But Bill goes more into the detail of what identifies what those types are. The heavy drinker, the moderate drinker, the person who can take a drink and leave it alone. But anyway, we'll do the doctor's opinion. We'll start that next week. And anyone who would like to share on anything we read tonight or anything you'd like to talk about at all is fine with me. Okay. Now we're going to facilitate the reading of Roman numeral page XI through page 164 of Alcoholics Anonymous, the big book, sequentially over the course of weeks, allowing several people attending to read a few paragraphs each. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, last week we left off on beginning of the doctor's opinion. And you know what they say about opinions? No, just kidding. This guy here, this is William Duncan Silkworth. He was Bill's, I don't guess you could call him a general practitioner. He was more like a psychotherapist or something. But anyway, he was the head of this town's hospital up there. He was the physician in charge, the head physician. I read in the AA Comes of Age that about, I guess it was right after Dr. Bob died, so it was about 15 years after the Bill Wilson had been to his hospital for the last time as a patient, that he went to this Knickerbocker hospital with another doctor, not Harry Tiebout, but he started, that's where he says he administered to 40,000 alcoholics at this Knickerbocker hospital up until the day he died. 40,000. That tops Dr. Bob's. I read Dr. Bob's 5,000 at that hospital in Akron, whatever. I forget the name of that hospital. But the 40,000, wow. And Bill Wilson called Silkworth one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. So we'd look to Bill and Bob and say, hey, there's our founders. And they go, no, not me. Silkworth was one of our founders. And William James of the Varieties of Religious Experience, and Dr. Young. But anyway, so, one of the things that was beneficial about Dr. Silkworth here was that Bill Wilson was preaching to people. For 6 months, he failed to sober anybody up. And he had failed to sober anybody for 6 months, and he went back to Dr. Silkworth and said, what am I doing wrong? What's going on here? And he said, you're talking down to him. You need to deliver this twin ogre of the obsession of the first drink. And once you take the first drink, you get this allergy that sets up that compels you to keep going till you die. And that's what the very first person that he tried that on was when he went to Akron. From the way I understand it, the first person that he tried that on was Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob sobered up, never drank again, and that was the birth date of Alcoholics Anonymous. But it was due to Dr. Silkworth telling him, stop speaking down to people. You're telling them they got to have this white light thing, and they're not listening to you because you sound like some religious nut, some religious zealot who's telling them to, pick themselves up and look at you down there. You're down there, I'm up here. That's where we got that try not to speak down to people from a spiritual hilltop thing was from his first 6 months of failed attempts to sober anybody up, as it's put. The doctor's opinion, XX, that's 13, Roman numeral 13, I think. I don't know. These books are all different pages lately. Oh, is it? So it's 15? Oh, just to go to the first page of the doctor's opinion. We of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the reader... Now remember that we, again, how many times have I been in AA where I hear people refer to we as we the family, and it's coming out of those rehabs, where it's like sort of a human dependence on other human beings to where, together we can do this as a family. Whenever I hear somebody go, good evening, family, I go, family? What? I don't know where they get that from, but the thing being, the reason I point that out was because there was somewhat of a movement going on, in my opinion, the way that I experienced it. I sometimes felt like I was left out. I had a few people that I hung out with, but I never had this clique of like 8 or 10 guys who always stayed together in this group, and we were like some kind of family, and it was. I have a family, yeah, but my family was sort of, even when we were in the same room, we were distant, But that whole idea of, and I later learned that it was a reason why I didn't much care for that whole 8, 10, 12 people in a big clique of like a family, was that's not what AA is. It's not about that. It's about you and God. And whenever you see we, this has nothing, and the reason we point that out, the reason I point that out, is because some people think that if you get close to these people, they're going to help keep you sober. But if none of them knows the 12 steps and knows how to get you close to God, then they ain't going to do a damn thing for you. I always say, hey, they're probably, you think you're going to call me and tell me your problems, I might join you in a drink. Hell, don't call God and tell him your problems. I'm just another drunken bum. That's who I am. So we of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the reader will be interested in the medical estimate of the plan of recovery described in this book. Remember, he says that Alcoholics Anonymous is born of medicine, psychiatry, and religion. No particular one it favors, but it's born of all three, is the way he puts it. Convincing testimony must surely come from medical men who have had experience with the sufferings of our members and have witnessed our return to health. A well-known doctor, chief physician at a nationally prominent hospital, that's at Towns Hospital, yeah, specializing in alcoholic and drug addiction, gave Alcoholics Anonymous this letter. So I don't guess you'd say he was a general practitioner. They were specializing. Probably one of the first hospitals to do that, the way I understand it. To whom it may concern, and this is like the short version. They give them an extended version here after this first page here. To whom it may concern, I have specialized in the treatment of alcoholism for many years. In late 1934, I attended a patient who, though he had been a competent businessman of good earning capacity, talking about Bill Wilson, obviously, was an alcoholic of the type I had come to regard as hopeless. And you know that he gives us these types over here in this other section. There are, 5 of them, right? Yeah, 5 types over on page 20, 28, 29, 30, I guess would be your books, page 30. In the course of his third treatment, he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. And we all know where he got that from. He got that from Ebby Thatcher. Ebby Thatcher had first come to him in his house, and we'll see that in Bill's story. Ebby Thatcher first came to him at his house, and he didn't really sober up right away. He got drunk, and then Ebby came to visit him in the hospital and gave him he said, what's this treatment that you got again? He asked him, and he gave it to him again at the hospital, and it was in the hospital that he had worked his steps there. So he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. As part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. And, that's one of the most important things that I teach when I go to AA. I've narrowed it down over the last, 20 years I've been sober to that. If I ever ask myself, what am I doing at an AA meeting, that's the primary message that I carry. That there's so many people think that you can come in and hang out and push in chairs and make coffee, and there's other forms of service, and those forms of service are good. But the number one, the only thing that will help us build a defense against that next drink is working with another alcoholic. It cannot be done without. This is one thing. You can do without making coffee and stay sober. You can do without pushing in chairs, giving people rides to meetings, but you can't do without helping others. And for some reason, it seems that maybe it's just my imagination, but I think that some people, maybe it's the hard work involved. It's like, who wants to do all that hard work? Who wants to go around telling? And if you're not doing it, how can you tell other people to do it? That's therefore you don't really hear that much of it around here. To present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. This has become the basis. So that's the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. When we get out to those chapters, to the employers, to the wives, and to the family afterward. I always, whenever I'm reading those chapters or commenting on those chapters, I say that from the Oxford groups came the idea that the 12 steps are for everyone, that everyone can learn to forgive when they're angry, to get rid of their anger, and everyone can learn to make amends when they've harmed others, that these spiritual solutions that we have are for everyone. In those 3 chapters, I've got it circled and highlighted in those chapters where he actually tells the wives to forgive the husbands and to help them find other alcoholics to work with and to make amends if they've harmed their husband. Those directions are given across the board to everyone, and you can see where he says these men and their families. This man and over 100 others appear to have recovered. I personally know of scores of cases who were of the type of whom other methods had failed completely. These facts appear to be of extreme medical importance because of the extraordinary possibilities of rapid growth inherent in this group. They may mark a new epoch in the annals of alcoholism. These men may well have a remedy for thousands of such situations. You may rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves. Very truly yours, William Duncan Silkworth, medical doctor. The physician who at our request gave us this letter had been kind enough to enlarge upon his views in another statement which follows. In this statement he confirms what we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe, that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. It did not satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we were in full flight from reality, or we were outright mental defectives. These things were true to some extent, in fact to a considerable extent with some of us, but we are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. In our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out this physical factor is incomplete. The doctor's theory that we have an allergy to alcohol interests us. As laymen, our opinion as to its soundness may, of course, mean little. But as ex-problem drinkers, we can say that his explanation makes good sense. It explains many things for which we cannot otherwise account. Though we work out our solution on the spiritual as well as the altruistic plane, we favor hospitalization for the alcoholic who is very jittery or befogged. Now, that favoring hospitalization, that to me, I work with a lot of people who, hospitalization for me came in the form of the county jail. It's just all it meant was a period away from that first drink, enough time, like he says, the alcoholic who is jittery or befogged, and it clears up your mind enough, just enough that you can understand, to understand what it is, that the simple ideas. It's real simple, but my attention span was virtually non-existent when I was drinking. But I don't know. Lately, I've been focusing on the need for hospitalization for people who are really out there. I mean, if you haven't experienced it, you will. I mean, a lot of I hate to say it, but a lot of opiate addicts that I work with are really hard to get them away from that stuff, man. It's just, I always say, how you can tell if they're on it, they're happy, and if they're angry, they're off of it. So I don't know why, but that seems to be the case for most of them. More often than not, it is imperative that a man's brain be cleared before he is approached, as he has then a better chance of understanding and accepting what we have to offer. The doctor writes, now this is the second doctor's opinion, the subject presented in this book seems to me to be of paramount importance to those afflicted with alcoholic addiction. I say this after many years' experience as medical director of one of the oldest hospitals in the country treating alcoholic and drug addiction. Hey, wait a minute. Did he just say drug addiction? We're not allowed that in here. You need to hit the door there, buddy. There was, therefore, a sense of real satisfaction when I was asked to contribute a few words on a subject which is covered in such masterly detail in these pages. Now, how long did I open this book and stay sober before I actually learned that it was in masterly detail, a subject which is covered in such masterly detail in these pages? I tell you, I came in here and I heard people say things like, yes, 10 different people how to work the steps. You get 10 different ways to work the steps. There's no real set way of working the steps. I've even been to NA meetings and asked them, guys with time, 20 years, and said, can you explain to me in brief, an expurgated version what their fourth step was? And I have 3 or 4 people who could not answer that question for me. And I said, look, I wasn't asking you to give me a 5-hour spiel about it. We explained to me your 4th step, you know. But I haven't had any of them actually explain it to me like I've gotten it from this book, and the masterly detail. And using the words of this book are, for me, the most important thing, like the most common manifestations of self that block us from God's will. Like in the 4th step, he says, we hope you now see what, we hope you know now that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from him. That's the most simple idea right there. And how many years did I breeze right over that before I actually saw it, you know? And when he says the masterly detail, it took me actually to find somebody who knew what that detail was and to slow me down and explain it to me before I actually saw that. We doctors have realized for a long time that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. What with our ultra-modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. You know, that synthetic knowledge, there's a spot in More About Alcoholism. No, there is a solution. There's a spot and there is a solution where he says, we had already walked far over the bridge of reason towards the desired shore of faith. But for some reason, we could not quite step ashore. We couldn't. We had we not been leaning too heavily on reason. And to me, that was a really important thing for me because, you see, I believed in God since I was like a teenager, all right? But it was that part where I had this complete reliance and dependence upon God that I was having that trouble with. I somehow thought that I could make a conscious contact with God with intellect and scientific knowledge and the brain and the awareness of the world or something. I didn't understand, and the point I'm getting at here is I didn't understand that my relationship with God is based on what I do every day, that the actions that I take every day is my faith in God. It doesn't take place in my head. I don't sit somewhere in quiet and go, home, God come to me, home, because it ain't coming. The way God comes to me is what I do with my life. And one day I ran across a guy who said, you know, how close I feel to God is in direct proportion to what I do for God. And that, to me, is what he's talking about here. The powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. Somewhat of a reference to that the bridge of reason does not lead to the land of faith. You must take the leap and do the action required. You must sacrifice your life and your time to help others in order to receive the closeness to God that I feel, that I believe that's what they're trying to explain to us. Many years ago, one of the leading contributors to this book came under our care, obviously Bill Wilson again, in this hospital, and while here he acquired some ideas which he put into practical application at once. Later he requested the privilege of being allowed to tell his story to other patients here, and with some misgiving we consented. I think Bill Wilson put it as he put his own career in jeopardy. Actually put his own career in jeopardy to let Bill come and work on these alcoholics. And fortunately for him, it worked out. The cases we have followed through have been most interesting. In fact, many of them are amazing. The unselfishness of these men as we have come to know them, the entire absence of profit motive, and their community spirit is indeed inspiring to one who has labored long and wearily in this alcoholic field. They believe in themselves and still more in the power which pulls chronic alcoholics back from the gates of death. Of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from his physical craving for liquor, and this often requires a definite hospital procedure before psychological measures can be of maximum benefit. We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics, and this is that double sledgehammer of his, the obsession followed by the allergy, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. And once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. Frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. I guess that's like crying and screaming and begging. And the message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. That's one of my favorite passages right there. The message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. And for me, that is Alcoholics Anonymous program of recovery. The idea that, in the 11th step, he says, when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives, our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane. And that's like the whole idea behind the inventory, the 3 spiritual solutions, and the idea of how close I feel to God is in direct proportion to how much I do step 12. If I'm not doing step 12, then obviously that's how close I'm not feeling to God. But the depth and weight, to me, it was so simple that it was clear to understand, yet there also came that idea that if you don't do it, you won't get it. This is not something that takes place in your head. In nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. If any feel that as psychiatrists directing a hospital for alcoholics we appear somewhat sentimental, let them stand with us a while in the firing line, see the tragedies, the despairing wives, the little children. Let the solving of these problems become a part of their daily work and even of their sleeping moments. And the most cynical will not wonder what we have accepted and encouraged, that we have accepted and encouraged this movement. We feel after many years of experience that we have found nothing which has contributed more to the rehabilitation of these men than the altruistic movement now growing up among them. It's the second time we've seen that altruistic thing there. So up here he says psychiatrist, so obviously then Silkworth was a psychiatrist. If any feel that as a psychiatrist directing in a hospital for alcoholics we appear somewhat sentimental. So that I haven't really noticed that before, but obviously he was a psychiatrist. I did see that there's a letter between Dr. Carl Jung and Silkworth in this other book. It's like a 3 or 4 page letter between Silkworth and Jung. Dr. Carl Jung, the Swedish, wasn't it? Swedish psychiatrist, one of the founders of modern psychiatry. And I think there's even a reference to him, and it says a certain American businessman went overseas, and that's a reference to this guy who, you guys remember that there were 2 guys who got Ebby Thatcher out of the clink, so to speak, went before a judge and got him so that they didn't commit him to a mental hospital. They got Ebby Thatcher released to them, and one of those 2 guys was that guy who went to Carl Jung was, what the hell is Roland Hazard. Roland Hazard was one of the 2 guys. Certain American businessman there. Okay, men and women. My first sponsor used to repeat this all the time in meetings. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. In other words, it feels good to drink. And my first sponsor used to always say, okay, so what was so wrong with the way that you were feeling that you had to have alcohol to feel better? We're going to get to that inner self and make that inner self feel better about who it is. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. Differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense and ease of comfort which comes at once by taking of a few drinks. Drinks which they see others taking with impunity. After they have succumbed to the desire again, and so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over, and unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there is very little hope of his recovery. That kind of reminds me of that thing that's floating around AA about how many times do I hear that? I hear it so many times it makes me... I have to use the forgiveness thing on it all the time. that whole thing about what's the definition of insanity? He's doing the same thing over and somebody throw a rock and hit that guy in the head. See, the reason why we talk about insanity in Alcoholics Anonymous is not because of craziness. It's because of alcoholic insanity. Alcoholic insanity, and I hear people come in here and they make a reference to, my life's getting insane again. Are you drinking? No? Well, then your life ain't insane, because we're only talking about alcoholic insanity. You see, these 12 steps don't work for schizophrenia. They don't work for bipolar. They don't work for any of that manic depressive. All they work for is alcoholism. But anyway, on the other hand, as strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems and despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol. The only effort necessary being that required The only effort necessary being that required to follow a few simple rules. Men have cried out to me in sincere and despairing appeal, Doctor, I cannot go on like this. I have everything to live for. I must stop, but I cannot. You must help me. Faced with this problem, if a doctor is honest with himself, he must sometimes feel his own inadequacy. Although he gives all that is in him, it is often not enough. One feels that something more than human power is needed to produce the essential psychic change. And to me, I have to tell you, that's one of the things. When I have a sponsee who's in relapse, and they come to me thinking I have the answers for them. They go, "What do I do? You got time? What do I do?" And I say, I want to come down and I want to say, I know what to do. I got all this time. I've been through the book to do this, and the only answer I have, the only answer that I come up with is a humble answer, and I say, ask God for help. On your knees, you humbly, with all of your sincerity and your heart, you ask God for help, because that's what happened to me. That's the only thing I can come up with. Though the aggregate of recoveries resulting from psychiatric effort is considerable, we physicians must admit we have made little impression upon the problem as a whole. Many types do not respond to the ordinary psychological approach. I do not hold with those who believe that alcoholism is entirely a problem of mental control. I have had many men who had, for example, worked a period of months on some problem or business deal which was to be settled on a certain date favorably to them. They took a drink the day or so prior to the date, and then the phenomenon of craving at once became paramount to all other interest, so that the important appointment was not met. These men were not drinking to escape. They were drinking to overcome a craving beyond their mental control. There are many situations which arise out of the phenomenon of craving which cause men to make the supreme sacrifice rather than continue to fight. Now, this is where he's going to give us these 5 classifications, he calls it. He doesn't say the 5 types, he says the classifications. The classification of alcoholics seems most difficult, and there is much detail, and much detail is outside the scope of this book. There are, of course, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. We are all familiar with this type. They are always going on the water wagon. They are over-remorseful and make many resolutions, but never a decision. There is the type of man who is unwilling to admit, though he cannot take a drink. He plans various ways of drinking. He changes his brand or his environment. There is the type who always believes, after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, he can take a drink without danger. There is the manic depressive type, who is perhaps the least understood by his friends and about whom a whole chapter could be written. And there are the types entirely normal in every respect except the effect alcohol has upon them. They are often able, intelligent, friendly people. Out in the chapter to wives, see, this is the Dr. Silkworth's description of the 5 types of alcoholics. But Bill Wilson goes into real detail out in the chapter to wives. And not only does he go into detail about the types of alcoholics out there, but he goes into detail about how to approach each one of those different types. He'll say, this is type number 1, type number 2, and then he'll say it right after he gives you all the types. He says, this is how to approach the alcoholic who is in the throes of type number 1. This is how to approach type number 2. And he sort of builds on each one. Sometimes he'll say you use the approach of both number 1 and 2, and here's a little extra you throw into how to work with this person who's at the third stage of this out. And being the last stage would be the gutter guy who's literally drinking scope or something and sleeping in behind dumpsters and eating out of dumpsters and stuff would be like the last one of those. But anyway, the best one is out there in the chapter to wives. I say that because sometimes I get the chapter of wives and I go, the chapter to wives. Well, I'm not a wife. Why are we reading this? But there's so much out there, All these and many others have one symptom in common. They cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving. This phenomenon, as we have suggested, may be the manifestation of an allergy which differentiates these people. I've always hated that word, allergy, but it took me a few years to get used to it. The obsession I understood, but the allergy thing, I said, that's not an allergy. I know what an allergy is. You sneeze and your eyes get watery and, you itch and scratch. But the thing is, you see, being the English language, we don't, being confined to the English language, we don't have a better word to describe it. So if you're searching for any of the words that we have, allergy is like the closest word we have to that. So it took me a while to get used to that. It also took me a while to get used to saying the word God. I used to always, power greater than ourselves, higher power, and I haven't said that in years other than reading it now. It took me a while to get used to the God thing. Same thing with that allergy. I'm okay with the allergy thing now. May be the manifestation of an allergy which differentiates these people and sets them apart as a distinct entity. It has never been, by any treatment with which we are familiar, permanently eradicated. The only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence. Entire abstinence. So that's an important thing in Alcoholics Anonymous. That I have to tell you, my personal experience was that I wasn't looking for entire abstinence, and it was just, and when I see a lot of the guys that I try to help, and a lot of the people that I really don't help at all because they don't ask me, but I see them going through this in their lives, is that I wasn't looking for entire abstinence. I was looking for controlled drinking. I said, I understand you guys have this complete stop thing, but all I want to go back to is the good old days when I can, drink a couple of beers with the guys, smoke a doob, and I'm okay again. But I had made that transition to where it took what it took. That's all there is to it. And when I see other people going through what they're going through, I don't go, oh, it's so sad that these people don't make it in Alcoholics Anonymous. I simply see that as a stage of their recovery. The stage of their recovery in which they're still struggling with the idea that they cannot safely take one drink ever again as long as they live. And that's all I see. Even though it may be 10 years of their life, 15, 20 years, it only took me for that 5 years of hell that I lived through, my experience was. But hey, it takes them 10, 15, 20, and that's all. I used to do the same thing. I'd get almost bummed out and go, gee, nobody's making it in AA, boo-hoo. But now I say, well, it's just, it's that stage of their recovery. The stage in which they're struggling with this entire abstinence thing. This immediately precipitates us into a seething cauldron of debate. Much has been written pro and con, but among physicians, the general opinion seems to be that most chronic alcoholics are doomed. What is the solution? Perhaps I can best answer this by relating one of my experiences. You see how what he's doing here is he's telling you what it is that he's experienced, what he's gone through. He's not telling you, something like a clinical book study or something. And that's one of the guys that I followed around said, listen, when you try to teach the 12 steps, when you try to explain it to somebody else, if you're trying to explain it to them from a book and from what you read in a book, it's really going to sound and feel disingenuous to them. You need to get it from your heart and from your own experience. And when you read Bill's story or any of the other stories, you'll see how what they're doing is they're trying to tell you exactly what happened to them, how it felt to them, the experience that they had, and therefore it's much more of a genuine feeling that you get when you're listening to them. And that's what he's saying here is, it's definitely a powerful thing for us. And I can tell you, sometimes I can almost spot people who are quoting, the things that they had heard over the years. What is the solution? Perhaps I can best answer this by relating one of my experiences. About 1 year prior to this experience, a man was brought to me to be treated for chronic alcoholism. He had but partially recovered from a gastric hemorrhage and seemed to be a case of pathological seemed to be a case of pathological mental deterioration. He had lost everything worthwhile in life and was only living, one might say, to drink. He frankly admitted and believed that for him there was no hope. Following the elimination of alcohol, there was found to be no permanent brain injury. He accepted the plan outlined in this book. 1 year later, he called to see me, and I experienced a very strange sensation. I knew the man by name and partly recognized his features, but there all resemblance ended. From a trembling, despairing, nervous wreck had emerged a man brimming over with self-reliance and contentment. I talked with him for some time, but was not able to bring myself to feel that I had known him before. To me, he was a stranger, and so he left me. A long time has passed with no return to alcohol. When I need a mental uplift, I often think of another case brought in by a physician prominent in New York. The patient had made his own diagnosis and decided his situation hopeless. Had hidden in a deserted barn, determined to die, he was rescued by a searching party, and in desperate condition brought to me. Following his physical rehabilitation, he had a talk with me in which he frankly stated that he thought the treatment a waste of effort, unless I could assure him, which no one ever had, that in the future he would have the willpower to resist the impulse to drink. His alcoholic problem was so complex and his depression so great that we felt his only hope would be through what we then called moral psychology, and we doubted even that would have any effect. However, he did become sold on the ideas contained in this book. He has not had a drink for a great many years. I see him now and then. He is as fine a specimen of manhood as one could wish to meet. I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book through, and though perhaps he came to scoff, he may remain to pray. William D. Silkworth, M.D. So, one of the things that I was reading the other day, and it's just, every time I see William Silkworth's name on stuff, I stop for a minute. And it was in Comes of Age, and I was glancing over it again, and it was a paper that he had written to, I don't have it up here, but it was a paper, I'll give you a brief. In this paper, he had made reference to why Alcoholics Anonymous was having success with other alcoholics. It's in the back of Comes of Age, and he was stating flat out that the reason Alcoholics Anonymous was having success was because we were immediately, upon helping these alcoholics, were instructing them to help others. Within days or even a week or so of getting sober, they were helping other alcoholics. And today, we're not doing that, and everybody's wondering why nobody's making it. And it's repeated again and again, over and over in a lot of our literature, where we had been, previously in the foreword. It also indicated, this is page XVII, which is 17, Roman numeral 17. This is the foreword to the second edition, one of my favorite of all the forewords, but it's one of my favorite parts of the book, where it's just basically the same story. Bill Wilson meets Dr. Bob, and immediately they start working on other alcoholics, and both of them stay sober. It says, this seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. And whenever I used to read stuff like that, I would read it from the standpoint of, I'm the sponsee and I need another alcoholic working with me. But that's not what it's saying. It's saying that you are the alcoholic who's working with somebody else. If you'll read it from that standpoint, they all do. Even in the back towards Vision for You, where he says, though you be but one man with this book in your hand, we believe that you can duplicate with the same success rate as us if you go with it. If you go about it, that's in Dr. Bob's story about that. But anyway, he's talking about you immediately helping others. Tonight we're starting Bill's story, and I'm an alcoholic. My name's Doug. My sobriety date is August 17th, 1990. With any luck, about another month or so, I'll have 20 years. Now, Bill's story is 16 pages. It's chapter 1, starts on page 1. The bad news is the first 6 pages of Bill's story are drunkalogue. But, I've always said one of the things I've maintained throughout my sobriety is if I find any lacking in my ability to teach the steps to others, it would be somewhere in the first step, because for me, my experience with the first step was, I don't know what to say other than I got it from alcohol, and I really didn't do a whole lot of reading. Or I understand the idea that, in the doctor's opinion there, that the obsession followed by the allergy once we pick up the first drink. And whenever I have one of my sponsees who doesn't make it, that's the first thing I think is maybe I should have spent a little more time on the first step. But like I said, I don't believe that any amount of book smarts will give me or anybody else the first step. It can only come from a bottle. But in these first, we'll try to get through these 6 pages here, so the first half of this chapter. And on page 7, he begins talking about it's when the sobriety and the steps start to kick in Bill's story here, where he begins to talk about his being placed in this rehabilitation center. And he starts talking about Dr. Silkworth and his recovery and his relapses. But in these first 6 pages, he's going to be talking about his drinking. And I guess we're expected to be tuning into step 1 here for the next 6 pages. And like I said, if I had any problem with my sobriety, I'd need to redouble my efforts at trying to teach the first step. But I don't know. I do the same thing with some people, and they stay sober as I do others who get drunk. So, what does he say? Well, if a man is to find God, the desire must come from within. Okay, this is Bill's story, chapter 1. I'm not going to be able to do a whole lot of, that's why I was bringing that up. I'm not going to be able to do a whole lot of commenting on what we're reading here, because it's mostly, set in this October 29, 1930, 31, 32, and that period, and, that's a little before my time. And a lot of the terms used and phrases and stuff. Anyway, Bill's story, chapter 1, page 1. War fever ran high, and the New England town to which we new young officers from Plattsburgh were assigned, and we were flattered when the first citizens took us to their homes, making us feel heroic. Here was love, applause, war, moments sublime with intervals hilarious. I was part of life at last, and in the midst of the excitement I discovered liquor. I forgot the strong warnings and the prejudices of my people concerning drink. In time we sailed for over there. I was very lonely and again turned to alcohol. We landed in England. I visited Winchester Cathedral. Much moved, I wandered outside. My attention was caught by a doggerel on an old tombstone. Now he says there, much moved, and he refers back to this later on as part of his spiritual experience that he has. He refers back to my time in that old time in Winchester Cathedral. So apparently he just makes a brief mention of it here, but it was pretty profound. It was kind of like, he's facing death here in World War I, I guess it was. This was back in before World War II, so, all this stuff takes place before the 1940s. But that much moved is referred to later on. Here lies a Hampshire grenadier who caught his death drinking cold small beer. A good soldier is ne'er forgot whether he dieth by musket or dieth by pot. So that cold small beer, you know what that was? I was watching a show recently about bottled water, modern bottled water. And in the old days, there wasn't a whole lot of filtered water going. There was no filtered water. All you got was water that they got out of the river, the lakes, the pumps, the whatever, the wells. And they may have boiled it or something, but for the most part, you would drink water and get to, go to the bathroom for 2 or 3 days, and water was very dangerous back then, not like it is now. We take it for granted. So what they would do, they would make this real light version of beer with just a little bit of alcohol in it, and that little tiny bit of alcohol would kill the bugs in it that would not make you so. It was almost like drinking water. That's what he's talking about when he says drinking cold small beer. That didn't mean they were sitting around drinking beer. That means that was the form of water that they were drinking in a sense. It's almost like something like that near beer that they have today. Anyway, ominous warning which I failed to heed. 22 and a veteran of foreign wars, I went home at last. I fancied myself a leader, for had not the men of my battery given me a special token of appreciation, my talent for leadership, I imagined, would place me at the head of some vast enterprises which I would manage with the utmost assurance. I took a night law course and obtained employment as an investigator for a surety company. The drive for success was on. I'd prove to the world I was important. My work took me about Wall Street, and little by little I became interested in the market. Many people lost money, but some became very rich. Why not I? I studied economics and business as well as law. Potential alcoholic that I was, I nearly failed my law course. At one of the finals, I was too drunk to think or write. Though my drinking was not yet continuous, it disturbed my wife. We had long talks when I would still her forebodings by telling her that men of genius conceive their best projects when drunk, that the most majestic constructions of philosophic thought were so derived. By the time I had completed the course, I knew the law was not for me. The inviting maelstrom of Wall Street had me in its grip. Business and financial leaders were my heroes. Out of this alloy of drink and speculation, I commenced to forge the weapon that one day would turn in its flight like a boomerang and all but cut me to ribbons. Living modestly, my wife and I saved $1,000. It went into certain securities, then cheap and rather unpopular. I rightly imagined that they would someday have great rise. I failed to persuade my broker friends to send me out looking over factories and managements, but my wife and I decided to go anyway. I had developed a theory that most people lost money in stocks through ignorance of markets. I discovered many more reasons later on. We gave up our positions and off we roared on a motorcycle, the sidecar stuffed with a tent, blankets, and change of clothes, and 3 huge volumes of financial reference service. Our friends thought a lunacy commission should be appointed. Perhaps they were right. I had some success at speculation, so we had a little money. But we once worked on a farm for a month to avoid drawing on our small capital. That was the last honest manual labor on my part for many a day. We covered the whole eastern United States in a year. At the end of it, my reports to Wall Street procured me a position there and the use of a large expense account. The exercise of an option brought in more money, leaving us with a profit of several $1,000s for that year. For the next few years, fortune threw money and applause my way. I had arrived. My judgment and ideas were followed by many to the tune of paper millions. The great boom of the late 20s was seething and swelling. Drink was taking an important and exhilarating part of my life. There was loud talk in the jazz places uptown. Everyone spent in thousands and chatted in millions. Scoffers could scoff and be damned. I made a host of fair weather friends. My drinking assumed more serious proportions, continuing all day and almost every night. The remonstrances of my friends terminated in a row, and I became a lone wolf. There were many unhappy scenes in our sumptuous apartment. There had been no real infidelity, for loyalty to my wife, helped at times by extreme drunkenness, kept me out of those scrapes. In 1929, I contracted golf fever and went at once to the country, my wife to applaud, while I started out to overtake Walter Hagen. Liquor caught up with me much faster than I caught up behind Walter. I began to be jittery in the morning. Golf permitted drinking every day and every night. It was fun to carom around the exclusive course which had inspired such awe in me as a lad. I acquired the impeccable coat of tan one sees upon the well-to-do. The local banker watched me whirl fat checks in and out of his till with amused skepticism. Abruptly in October 1929, hell broke loose on the New York Stock Exchange. After one of those days of inferno, I wobbled from a hotel bar to a brokerage office. It was 8 o'clock, 5 hours after the market had closed. The ticker still clattered. I was staring at an inch of tape which bore the inscription XYZ-32. It had been 52 that morning. I was finished, and so were many friends. The papers reported men jumping to their death from the towers of high finance. That disgusted me. I would not jump. I went back into the bar. My friends had dropped several million since 10 o'clock, so what? Tomorrow was another day. As I drank, the old fierce determination to win came back. Next morning, I telephoned a friend in Montreal. He had plenty of money left and thought I had better go to Canada. By the following spring, we were living in our accustomed style. I felt like Napoleon returning from St. Elba. From Elba, no St. Helena for me. But drinking caught up with me again, and my generous friend had to let me go. This time we stayed broke. We went to live with my wife's parents. I found a job, then lost it as a result of a brawl with a taxi driver. Mercifully, no one could guess that I was to have no real employment for 5 years, or hardly draw a sober breath. My wife began to work in a department store, coming home exhausted to find me drunk. I became an unwelcome hanger-on at brokerage places. Liquor ceased to be a luxury. It became a necessity. Bathtub gin. 2 bottles a day and often 3 got to be the routine. Sometimes a small deal would net a few $100s, and I would pay my bills at the bars and delicatessens. This went on endlessly, and I began to waken very early in the morning, shaking violently. A tumbler full of gin, followed by a half a dozen bottles of beer, would be required if I were to eat any breakfast. Nevertheless, I still thought I could control the situation, and there were periods of sobriety which renewed my wife's hope. Gradually, things got worse. The house was taken over by the mortgage holder. My mother-in-law died, and my wife and father-in-law became ill. Then I got a promising business opportunity. Stocks were at a low point of 1932, and I had somehow formed a group to buy. I was to share generously in the profits. Then I went on a prodigious bender, and that chance vanished. I woke up. This had to be stopped. I saw I could not take so much as one drink. I was through forever. Before then, I had written lots of sweet promises, but my wife happily observed that this time I meant business, and so I did. Now that idea right there, I have to tell you that the idea of swearing it off, for me, that when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I wanted to control my drinking. I don't know about you guys, but I had to do a little of my own testing. And for me, like I said, step one is the idea that we're trying to get out of these pages here. I just wanted to stop for a minute, and I'll do another page and a half, and then we'll get to that. We'll get to that part where he brings up his recovery from then on. Because there's only like one more time when he drinks after that part where he gets confined to this hospital by his mother-in-law, or brother-in-law, I'm sorry. But anyway, I woke up, this had to be stopped. I saw I could not take so much as one drink. I was through forever. Before then, I had written lots of sweet, but this, my wife happily observed, was the last time I meant business, and so I did. I think it was about 2 years after I actually did that I came crawling into AA, that I actually said I do not want to take another drink. And I used to actually, it's almost like I would just see myself. I think that the thought came into my head that I was going to the bar to hang out and I wasn't going to drink. And I was, how insane is that? I'm going to go hang out in the bar. And then once I would get a drink, I'd say, I'm only going to have one drink. And then once I would have one drink, I would say, oh, what the hell, I'm here now. We'll try it next week. That happened to me for like 2 years straight, to where I could not. It's the insanity that we're talking about is the alcoholic insanity, and that's the insanity that I experienced. That's how it came into my life, was I would always tell myself, I'm only going in the bar to hang out. I mean, hell, I ain't got nowhere else to hang out. I'm only going to hang out in there. And for me, I swore I wasn't going to take a drink. And once I got in there, it's almost like, you get this feeling inside that, oh, what the hell, it's over now. I'll just have one. But anyway, shortly afterward, I came home drunk. There had been no fight. Where had been my high resolve? I simply didn't know. It hadn't even come to mind. Somehow I'd pushed a drink my way. Someone had pushed a drink my way, and I had taken it. Was I crazy? I began to wonder, for such an appalling lack of perspective seemed near being just that. Renewing my resolve, I tried again. Some time passed, and confidence began to be replaced by cocksureness. I could laugh at the gin mills. Now I had what it takes. One day I walked into a cafe to telephone. In no time, I was beating on the bar, asking myself how it happened. As the whiskey rose to my head, I told myself I would manage better next time. But I might as well get good and drunk then, and I did. I hate to say it, but I know some guys out there who've been doing this for a better part of 20 years, and I wish I had the answer as to why I came up with the willingness to. I have to tell you, my sobriety all boiled down to a yes or a no question when I was either in jail and they said, "You want to go to the drug cells and rehab cells?" Or was it yes or no? And I go, "Oh, okay, yeah." And then on my way out the door, it was, "You want to go to the halfway house or back to the streets?" Well, okay, yeah. That's how my sobriety pretty much happened for me. I mean, other than the fact that the like Bill Wilson states later on, his sudden and profound spiritual experience, I had something similar to that. And from that day on, and for me, like I said earlier, my experience with it, and that's all I'm trying to convey to you guys is when you've got a sponsee sitting in front of you, and they ask you, "Will you please help me? You got some sobriety time. What can you do for me?" The only real thing that I can come up with is to try to relate to them what it was that happened to me, so that maybe I could help induce into them. Like Bill Wilson helped Dr. Bob understand that the fatal nature of his disease, and that was the turning point, because he says Dr. Bob had always thought he could beat the alcohol game on his own somehow. He always thought there was some kind of angle, and even though he was bouncing in and out of the Oxford groups for 2 years, it said. For 2 years. So he was in the Oxford groups longer than Bill Wilson was. He was bouncing in and out of the Oxford groups in Akron, Ohio. And it wasn't until he met Bill that Bill helped convey the message to him of the hopelessness and what Silkworth's allergy or obsession followed by the allergy ideas. But anyway, once again, back to where, it all boils down to this for me. My sobriety boils down to trying to help another alcoholic understand how to get what it is that Bill and these first 100 are trying to convey to us. And the best way, I heard a man say one time, if you try to explain to another person the 12 steps from someone else's point of view and how they've experienced it, it's going to be disingenuous, and it's not going to be the actual 12 steps. And so much as if I explain it to them the way that I experienced it, the way that I can look back in my life and what it was that happened to me. And, the idea here that Bill's getting, that he swore it off, and I'd look around and I'd say, I'm in this bar again. What the hell happened? A couple of minutes ago, I was 3 blocks up the street going home, and now I'm sitting in this bar again. And I got to tell you, it was almost like I had nothing to drink, I had nothing to smoke, I was completely clean and dry, and I was in some sort of blackout almost, to where I walked into the bar instead of home. That's the only way I can explain it was. But like I said, I have a little lacking when it comes to the first step. I usually, because both sponsors jumped me right to step 4. The first guy I met said, "We're going to sit down and write a list of the people, everybody you know." He didn't say a resentment list. He said, "Just put everybody's name down, and we'll get to that when you do the names." But anyway, back to the reading. The remorse, the horror, and the hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. The courage to do battle was not there. My brain raced uncontrollably, and there was a terrible sense of impending calamity. My first sponsor used to say that all the time. The impending doom is what he said. That fear of impending doom. He called it, what the hell was it he called it? I'll think of it in a minute. It's one of those psychiatric words. I hardly dared cross the street lest I collapse and be run down by an early morning truck, for it was scarcely daylight, and all-night places supplied me with a dozen glasses of ale. My writhing nerves were stilled at last. A morning paper told me the market had gone to hell again. Well, so had I. The market would recover, but I wouldn't. That was a hard thought. Should I kill myself? No, not now. Then a mental fog settled down. Gin would fix that. So 2 bottles and oblivion. So it's obvious he's had the thought of killing himself here. I got to tell you, I had that thought too, but I never really like said, "Oh, I'll kill myself." It was like in the back of my head, like, I'm out of here. I'm out of here. The hell with this. The mind and body are marvelous mechanisms, for mine endured this agony 2 more years. Sometimes I stole from my wife's slender purse when the morning terror and madness were on me. Again, I swayed dizzily before an open window or the medicine cabinet where there was poison, cursing myself for a weakling. There were flights from this city to country and back, as my wife and I sought escape. Then came the night when the physical and mental torture was so hellish, I feared I would burst through my window, sash and all. Somehow I managed to drag my mattress to a lower floor. So here he is thinking about suicide again. He's going to throw himself out a window. Twice he mentions it. Somehow I managed to drag my mattress to a lower floor. At least I suddenly leaped. A doctor came with a heavy sedative. Hey, wait a minute. We don't talk about those things in here. Next day found me drinking both gin and sedative. This combination soon landed me on the rocks. People feared for my sanity. So did I. I could eat little or nothing when drinking, when I was 40 pounds underweight. My brother-in-law is a physician, and through his kindness and that of my mother, I was placed in a nationally known hospital for the mental and physical rehabilitation of alcoholics. Under the so-called belladonna treatment, my brain cleared. Hydrotherapy and mild exercise helped much. Best of all, I met a kind doctor who explained that though certainly selfish and foolish, I had been seriously ill, bodily and mentally. So that's the first mention of sobriety here. I mean, the beginnings of his time spent with Dr. Silkworth here. Best of all, I met a kind doctor who explained that though certainly selfish and foolish, I had been seriously ill, bodily and mentally. It relieved me somewhat to learn that in alcoholics, the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor. Though it often remains strong in other respects, my incredible behavior in the face of desperate desire to stop was explained. Understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. For 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. I went to town regularly and even made a little money. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. But it was not. For the frightful day came when I drank once more. Now that self-knowledge thing, I got to tell you, I was in the rehab. I'm going to open up the floor for open discussion here in a minute. And we'll read the rest of this 16 pages in this chapter, so that'll give us 9 pages, or hell, once he starts into the recovery, I can slow down a lot because I can get to like one paragraph or something and spend 10 minutes talking, because he gets into all the steps here in the forwards, these next few pages. 15, 13, those are the pages with all the steps on it and the way he experienced them. Anyway, self-knowledge. There was a lot of that when I was in the rehab that I went to. I have to tell you, there were these mandatory meetings, and one of the things that I've noticed about myself and about other people is that there's hard work. Number one, there's hard work involved in getting sober and staying sober. And I'm talking about it when my sponsor said to me that giving was the answer, you have to give of yourself. I remember this was like 12 or 13 years ago, and I said, I have nothing. What can I give? I'm like nobody. I live from paycheck to paycheck almost. I'd be lucky to have a few thousand in the bank. And he said, no, you're not talking about giving money. We're talking about giving your time. You have to give your time to other people. When someone says, will you help me? My first thought was, well, I got to do this. I got this happening that day, and I'm not going to have time for you. And you see, that's when my sobriety kicks in. And what I was referring to was backing up with this self-knowledge idea was it boiled down to my sobriety boiled down to that moment in my life when someone says, will you help me? And that's what I try to convey to my sponsees. I say, there's another thing that I did early on too, was I avoided being an attractive person for sponsorship in meetings. There's a way that you can sit in a meeting and no one will ever ask you to sponsor them. And that's an excuse. You come up and go, hey, I would have sponsored people if somebody had asked me, but, nobody ever asked me to sponsor them. But if you'll look in the book here, we're instructed to go out and find doctors, priests, ministers, and rabbis and search out these people to work with. And nobody does that anymore, but what we do is we sit in meetings and we wait for somebody to ask us to sponsor them, to help them through the steps. And one of the things that happened to me several years back was I had spoke at a meeting, I think it was Central House, 12, 13 years ago. And there must not have been very many sober people around there. I had talked about the steps, spirituality, God. I knew I hated talking about myself. I think the first couple of times I spoke, I focused on where I was born, where I grew up, where I went to school, and I felt like crap afterwards. I didn't like it. So I switched over. Unlike Bill here, he talks a lot about the drinking, and I think there's a reason for that, and my sponsor heard me speak, and I didn't say anything about drinking. And he said, well, there's a reason for that, and that reason is that you don't want the people in the room to think that you're just some guy who ain't got nothing else to do with his time. You know, my life is so boring. I never really had a real drinking problem. I just thought I'd come in and hang out here because this is one of the places some people hang out. You want to acknowledge the fact that you're a real alcoholic and that you have your message carries depth and weight because, you know, you got a certain amount of time and you were a real alcoholic. It was two choices for me, die or get sober. That's what it boils down to. But this idea of self-knowledge, back to what I was getting to, was I was in the rehab and we had all these counselors, and it always seemed to me that they would show us these videos. They'd go, okay, tonight's lesson, we're going to play a video for you, and I'd stick a video and they'd walk off. They would not sit down with us. They wouldn't take the time to try to explain anything to us. And no, they were all recovering alcoholics themselves. I'm not trying to badmouth them. All I'm saying is I look back on it and I used to think, you know, it made me angry, and now today I see them, I say, you know, they couldn't transmit something that they didn't have. And though there was a lot of stuff that went on in there that was questionable, I came out of there sober, and I haven't had a drink since, and I think the world of the place. They helped me. And several other people that I knew stayed sober several years after that. But the self-knowledge is the tapes they used to play us. They used to have these doctors stand there and explain to us what the effect alcohol has on the body, on a molecular level, what alcohol does to the brain, blah, blah. And for years I thought that was good stuff. I go, man, this is the answer. We just get enough of this knowledge about what's happening to me and how these things affect my brain and the effects that alcohol has on the human body and, you know, the whole mechanical aspect of it, and it means nothing, absolutely nothing. It's real cute stuff, but it means nothing. And the sad part was they thought it did for some reason. I don't know. But anyway, I'm going to continue next week with when we start getting into Bill's step 1 is on the next page, page 8, and so we'll get right into the steps with him. You know, no words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that. So we got Bill's drunk log out of the way. I have to tell you, Bill's story is one of my favorite parts in the whole book because it's got the most basic idea of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that is that one alcoholic is going to drink. He's on the edge of a drink. He's done for. My time is over as a sober alcoholic. I'm going to drink. But wait, I find somebody to work with. I give of my time. I try to help somebody with, you know, genuine concern, and from the way that it makes me feel inside about who I am, of giving of myself, it keeps me sober. It takes me out of myself. It takes me away from the obsession for that first drink. And, you know, there's not a whole lot of the detail of the obsession. You'll find it in the 4th step, and you have to really go into the mechanics of the 4th step to see that fear is at the root of the obsession for that first drink. All fear is based in self, and we get out of that self-based fear by doing things for others. And it's a real simple idea, but it's best seen in 3 areas that I know of. A Vision for You. The entire chapter is all about Bill meets Bob. He's on the edge of a drink. He helps Bob stay sober. He stays sober. And so, too, is Bill's story. Bill's story is essentially he's on the edge of a drink. It's the same story. And forward to the 2nd edition, the whole, you know, the details of that story are in there. Some of the time frames are in there. Like he had 6 months of sobriety when he met Bob. He was on the edge of a drink. He had failed to sober dozens of people because he was speaking down to them from a spiritual hilltop. And Silkworth explained to him, you know, you're speaking down to them. You got to get down to their level and try to help bring them up instead of being up at your level and saying, come up with me, sort of, you know, that sort of thing. But next week we will continue with the Bill's steps, and I don't know, we'll try to get 3 or 4 pages because, like I said, the steps are really quick when you get to page 13. It's like step 3 through 11 on that one page, page 13. And I like to slow down when I'm getting into those pages and to see the breakdown, like we made a list of people I had hurt and toward whom I had felt resentment. And, you know, the 4th step, my schoolmate visited me, talking about Ebby Thatcher. And his third step, I humbly offered myself to God. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing. Without him, I was lost. Anyway, so we'll open up the floor for the second half of the meeting for open discussion. If I guess we're focusing on step one here, and the smashing of the ego, the deflating of the human ego. Anyone like to share on anything we just read tonight? Hey. We're going to facilitate the reading of Roman numeral pages XI through 164. We're going to read the big book. And I'm going to gab for about 30 minutes and read a few pages, and we'll open up the floor for discussion. And I'm an alcoholic. My name is Doug, again. My sobriety date is August 17th, 1990. And we left off on page 7 last week. We were in the pages pretty much dedicated to Bill's explanation of step 1, and there's a lot of it. 7 pages, 8 pages. 8 pages. So as we work our way through these next few pages, we're going to see Bill's surrender. We're going to see Bill's friend, his childhood friend, as he puts it, Edwin Thatcher, who gets rescued from the insane asylum from 2 guys from the Oxford groups, and how he explains to him the simple idea of recovery, and he does it twice. Once he does it in Bill's kitchen while Bill's drinking, and the second time he comes to the hospital when Bill's detoxing for the last time. And okay, so we're reading on page 7 right here about the last paragraph down from the bottom, talking about self-knowledge. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. But it was not. For the frightful day came when I drank once more. The curve of my declining morale and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. After a time I returned to the hospital. This was the finish. The curtain, it seemed to me. My weary and despairing wife was informed that it would all end with heart failure during delirium tremens, or I would develop a wet brain perhaps within a year. She would soon have to give me over to the undertaker or the asylum. They did not need to tell me. I knew, and almost welcomed the idea. It was a devastating blow to my pride. I, who had thought so well of myself and my abilities, of my capacity to surmount obstacles, was cornered at last. Now I was to plunge into the dark joining that endless process of sots who had gone on before. I thought of my poor wife. There had been much happiness after all. What would I not give to make amends? But that was over now. And remember, on the couple of pages back, he had contemplated suicide 3 times he makes reference to. He was going to jump out a window. He thought, should I kill myself? I think not. Swayed dizzily before an open window, and I feared I would burst through the window. So this is Bill's step 1, the way I have it lined out here. No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. Trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man, and fear sobered me a bit. And that's one of the ideas that I have circled here, that the way I was taught over the years, that there's 2 things that'll keep you sober. One of them is fear of what'll happen. And he says here, fear sobered me a bit. Then came the insidious insanity of that first drink. And the other way is, the way I've experienced it personally was, and the way I see it happening to a lot of people around me, is that fear sobers me up temporarily. Because this happened to me over and over in a period of 2 years. I would get a month, and the fear of what would happen would keep me sober for a month, and then I would drink again. I did nothing. I heard mention of steps. I heard mention of some of this, but it went in one ear and out the other. And you know what, I have to tell you, from my own point of view, I saw people in AA who didn't seem to be working any program at all. And I saw the people who were giving it everything they had. And I said, what, if these people can stay sober and they're not doing anything, they're just hanging out, and those people are working so hard, I think I'm going to take the hang out and do nothing, because who wants to work that hard? Who wants to spend so much time and working hard at staying sober, But I later learned a guy I came across years ago said, Don't make the mistake of thinking that this room is full of real alcoholics like you. There are some people in here who can stop on their own and don't need to give it everything that they have. They don't need the spiritual solution. They don't need God, and therefore it says the only requirement for AA is a desire to stop drinking. It doesn't say the requirement is that you be a real alcoholic like us. That's why we don't tell them, hey, you got to hit the road. You ain't a real alcoholic. We let anybody come in here who says they want to stop drinking. But you got to make the difference. You got to make the choice between saying, well, there is a difference between somebody who hangs out and does nothing and literally comes in late, leaves early, talks on the phone, distracts everybody, hitting on all the women or the men or whatever, because not everybody who comes in here is like me. This is life and death. But he says, fear sobered me for a bit, then came the insidious insanity of that first drink. And there's that word there, too, the insidious insanity of the first drink. And so many years I've been sitting in AA, and I hear people make a reference to in the second step where he says, that God could restore me to sanity. And it's not talking about, crazy, like, what are the diagnoses for, like, manic depressive or schizophrenia or paranoia, or any one of those clinical medical terms for insane behavior, That's not what we're talking about in AA, because you never hear psychiatrists prescribing 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous for those, mental illnesses. We get the insanity that we're talking about in AA is the insanity of that first drink. Knowing that I cannot take one drink without it leading to another. There's a big difference, and many people do not understand that. They come in here and go, oh, my life's getting insane again. I gave somebody the finger going down the road the other day, and I knew I better get to a meeting. We're not talking about that. We're talking about that brief thought that goes through your head just for an instant that says, you can have one. You can do it this time. That's the insidious insanity of that first drink. And it is also, just like his fear sobered me for a bit, as we read through the steps, we'll see that it too is rooted in fear. That fear, it says, selfishness and self-centeredness driven by 100 forms of fear is the root of our troubles. It is the cause. It is the root of that insidious insanity of that first drink. And on Armistice Day 1934, I was off again. Everyone became resigned to the certainty that I would have to be shut up somewhere or would stumble along to a miserable end. How dark it is before the dawn. In reality, that was the beginning of my last debauch. I was soon to be catapulted in what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. Near the end of that bleak November, I sat drinking in my kitchen. With a certain satisfaction, I reflected there was enough gin concealed about the house to carry me through the night and the next day. My wife was at work. I wondered whether I dared to hide a full bottle of gin near the head of our bed. I would need it before daylight. My musing was interrupted by the telephone, the cheery voice of an old school friend. So that's how he describes Ebby Thatcher. Edwin is his name, Edwin Thatcher. Ebby's like a nickname. And this, although I heard, Ebby was described as being Bill's sponsor from the Oxford groups, Ebby Thatcher drank, and Bill Wilson became Ebby's sponsor in Alcoholics Anonymous. So, voice of an old school friend asked if he might come over. He was sober. It was years since I could remember his coming to New York in that condition. I was amazed. Rumor had it that he had been committed for alcoholic insanity. I wondered how he had escaped. Of course he would have dinner, and then I could drink openly with him. Unmindful of his welfare, I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. There was that time we had chartered an airplane to complete a jag. His coming was an oasis in this dreary desert of futility. The very thing, an oasis. Drinkers are like that. The door opened and he stood there, fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. What had happened? I pushed a drink across the table and he refused it. Disappointed but curious, I wondered what had gotten into the fellow. He wasn't himself. Come, what's all this about? I queried. He looked straight at me, simply but smilingly. He said, I've got religion. I was aghast, so that was it. Last summer an alcoholic crackpot, now I suspected a little cracked over religion. He had that starry-eyed look. Yes, the old boy was on fire, all right, God bless his heart. But let him rant. Besides, my gin would last longer than his preaching. But he did no ranting. In a matter-of-fact way, he told how two men had appeared in court persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. Now, these two guys were from the Oxford groups, and one of them was Roland Hazard. And Roland Hazard is brought up in one of the later chapters here where he says a certain American businessman had gone to Europe seeking help from a psychiatric doctor, Carl Jung. And that Roland Hazard is one of the guys who, I guess, turned Ebby Thatcher on to... I've read in the other book, Comes of Age, that Carl Jung gave this book to Roland Hazard, and Roland Hazard gave the book to Ebby Thatcher. But the book is called William James, Variety of Religious Experience, and that book has a lot to do with the birth of Alcoholics Anonymous. And not many people really bring that up around AA, but Bill Wilson wrote a letter to Carl Jung and thanked him for giving that book to Roland Hazard, and had gone into detail about what that book had done for Alcoholics Anonymous. It was called Varieties of Religious Experience. And as you see when we read in here, he's going to bring this religious thing up over and over again, that it's not a word that he used infrequently. It's quite frequently in here. And I believe that editorial board that helped write the big book or somewhat, what they did was they made him take things out they didn't think were supposed to be in there. And that religious idea, this is one of the things that they... But anyway... persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. They had told of a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. That was 2 months ago, and the result was self-evident. It worked. He had come to pass his experience along to me, if I cared to have it. I was shocked but interested. Certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. He talked for hours. Childhood memories rose before me. I could almost hear the sound of the preacher's voice as I sat on still Sundays way over there on the hillside. There was that proffered temperance pledge I never signed, my grandfather's good-natured contempt of such church folk and their doings. That temperance was a movement back in the day when they didn't know what else to do. There was some kind of temperance movement where I saw it on one of the History Channel shows about alcohol, and apparently it was people who were really angry at drinkers, and they thought if they yelled at them and screamed at them enough they could stop them. They made them sign a piece of paper that said they'd never drink again. They'd never drink again. I never signed. My grandfather's good-natured contempt of such church folks and their doings, his insistence that the spheres really had their music, but his denial of the preacher's right to tell him how he must listen, his fearlessness as he spoke of these things just before he died, these recollections welled up from the past. They made me swallow it hard. Now, if you haven't figured it out by now, Bill Wilson is getting into this idea of God right now. He's going to tell us that he's not an atheist and that he was an agnostic. Not many people, I've said that to a couple of people who are big book thumpers, and they go, no, he wasn't. I go, it's proof positive in here. It says flat out, he says, I was not an atheist. I had always believed in some kind of power, some kind of something or other, but he's just not quite sure what. When we get to the second step, I'll show you one of the definitive statements that he makes that is clear that he wasn't sure whether there was a God or not, and that's all there is to it. And that is pretty much the explanation of an agnostic is, I don't know. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't, you know. That wartime day and old Winchester Cathedral came back again. Remember back in the first page when he says that he had this flash over him in that Winchester Cathedral, and it was closest thing to a spiritual experience that he had ever had, because he was going to fight and he thought he was going to die. You know, he thought, this is it, it's over. World War I was a brutal war. I don't know if you guys have read anything about that, but that was hand-to-hand combat and the brutality of the trench warfare in Belgium. Oh, my God. I saw a show once where there were 25,000 men died in one explosion. One explosion when they blew up a hill of Germans, 25,000 men in one. They set the bomb off, boom, and they put a marker at the end of the hill, said, in this hill are 25,000 men. And they go to war now, and you're like, somebody died today. Oh, my God, there's a dead guy in the war today. 25, and it's like hill number 242 in Belgium, and it was brutal, absolutely brutal. That's why he had gone to war and thought, this is it, it's over. the number of people that died in that war were. But anyway, I had always believed in a power greater than myself. So that was the proof positive that I've had people tell me, yeah, Bill believed in God. Look what he says. I had always believed in a power greater than myself. I had often pondered these things. I was not an atheist. Few people really are. For that means blind faith in a strange proposition that this universe originated in a cipher of aimlessly rushes nowhere. My intellectual heroes, the chemists, the astronomers, even the evolutionists, suggested vast laws and forces at work, despite contrary indications. I had little doubt that a mighty purpose and rhythm underlie all. How could there be so much of precise and immutable law and no intelligence? I simply had to believe in the spirit of the universe, who knew neither time nor limitation. But that was as far as I had gone. See, there's a statement there. That's as far as I had gone. He has not answered the question yet, essentially. With ministers and the world's religions, I parted right there. When they talked of a God personal to me, who was love, superhuman strength, and direction, I became irritated, and my mind snapped shut against such a theory. To Christ I conceded the certainty of a great man, not too closely followed by those who claimed him. His moral teaching most excellent. For myself, I had adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. The wars which had been fought, the burnings and chicanery that religious dispute had facilitated, made me sick. I honestly doubted whether, on balance, the religions of mankind had done any good. And I hear that a lot today, too. There's a lot of that in the news today, that the religion is at the root of more evil than good, you know. I honestly doubted women. Judging from what I had seen in Europe and since, the power of God in human affairs was negligible. The brotherhood of man a grim jest. If there was a devil, he seemed the boss universal, and he certainly had me. But my friend sat before me, and he made the point-blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. Now, the idea that complete defeat, the way that the psychiatrists, that Bill Wilson calls these psychiatrists the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. Everybody turned to Bill and said he was a founder. And there he is. And Bill turned around behind him and said, no, it wasn't me, it was them. It was the Silkworth and Young and Thibaut and all the psychiatrists that had helped explain to him the idea of the ego deflation and the importance of what it is that alcohol does to us, that it smashes us as people. Why? Because from that smashed and broken person, now you can build a new person. But somebody who's not completely smashed and completely broken still has a hint of that rebellion in them. That I don't really think I want to go through all that hard work of sponsoring people. Why do I have to sponsor people when that guy hangs out and he doesn't do a damn thing around here? Why can't I be like him or something? But the choice that I saw was, jump into this AA thing and give it everything that I got, or die. And that's the way I still see it. And I try to teach that to the guys that'll listen. But anyway, only alcohol can deliver that first step. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. Then he had, in effect, been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap. And that's one of the things my sponsor used to say. He'd say, I remember this, and it used to really almost bring a tear to my eye. He'd say, God reached into this pile of black, nasty goo and picked something up, and it was dripping with nasty, and he shook it off, and it was me. And he said, I got something for you to do. That's one of his things he used to say in the meeting all the time. Let's see. Suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. Had this power originated in him? Obviously it had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at that minute. And this was none at all. That floored me. It began to look as though religious people were right after all. Here was something at work in a human heart which had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past. Here sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. He shouted great tidings. I saw that my friend was much more than inwardly reorganized. He was on a different footing. His roots grasped a new soil. That's a pretty profound statement right there, huh? What do you say? I saw that my friend was much more than inwardly reorganized. He was on a different footing. His roots grasped new soil. Despite the living example of my friend, there remained in me the vestiges of my old prejudice. The word God still aroused a certain antipathy. When the thought was expressed that there might be a God personal to me, this feeling was intensified. I've heard that described as almost being violently anti-religious, and when I first saw that term, violently anti-religious, I think he wrote that in one of the other chapters, where he says, I think it's obviously it's in the second step, so it would be a chapter to the agnostics. He'd say that some of us had even become violently anti-religious, and when I saw that, I go, man, he got my number. Only because I always felt like they were talking down to me somehow, like they were better than me or something. When the thought was expressed to me that there might be a God personal to me, this feeling was intensified. I didn't like the idea. I could go for such conceptions as creative intelligence, universal mind, or spirit of nature, but I resisted the thought of a czar of the heavens, however loving his sway might be. I have since talked with scores of other men who felt the same way. Now, in the chapter We Agnostics, Bill writes that roughly half of our original fellowship, and I believe that's how he puts it, roughly half of our original fellowship were exactly of that type, atheist or agnostic. So when he says, I have since talked to scores of other men who felt the same way, he's talking about half of the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. 50% of all people who got sober were, more of them, I would guess, would be, agnostic than atheist, because I have to tell you, in all the people that I've helped in all the years, I've only come across one person who said flat out, unequivocally, no, I do not believe in God. There is no God. One guy out of like maybe 200 or more. So it's not a very big percentage of people who, once, I guess it's the God thing, runs them right back out the door. They step in the door, hear God, and they're gone, But anyway, my friend suggested what then seemed a novel idea. He said, so we're into step 2 here, and if you haven't noticed, and Bill's step 2. And on this next page, he goes literally through the next 11, or that would be 9 steps. 9 steps on this next page over here. That statement hit me hard. So here's the part that I point to when I say Bill was an agnostic. If you can see this, he says, why don't you choose your own conception of God? That statement hit me hard. It melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. And the reason he points that out is because if you're taking somebody through the steps and they answer this question, you say, do you believe in, because that was what I heard was the second or first question that Dr. Bob would sit at the foot of the bed, because you guys know that Dr. Bob had helped some 5,000 alcoholics at that hospital. I forget the name of it now, but it's the hospital in Akron, and the one that I guess he was in when Bill and Ann. St. Mary's? I don't remember. Anyway, the important thing is that I read in the book Comes of Age that Dr. Bob would sit at the foot of their bed, and the first thing he would say was, "You want to stop drinking? Do you believe in God, young fellow?" Was like the first thing. It was almost like that was their version of step 1 and 2. Do you want to stop drinking? Because some people, I have to tell you, I have actually had a couple of sponsees when I say, "Do you want to stop drinking?" They go, "Well, I'm having a little problem. I don't know. I'd like to be able to control it a little bit." And I go, "Well, when you want to stop drinking, you'll know where to find us, So it was only a matter of being willing to believe. The point I was trying to make is, if you get to step 2 and someone says, "I don't know whether there's a God or not," you don't have to say, "Well, we're stumped. We can't go on to step 3 until you answer the question, do you believe in God, yes or no?" We can't go on, because the way I understood it, if somebody says, "I don't know whether there's a God," because remember, we're going to run into like 50% of the people who come in here are going to say, "I'm not sure. I have not answered that question. I have gotten sidetracked with the family and the business and the kids and all that, and one thing led to another, and 20 years has gone by, and I just haven't answered the question of whether there's a God or not." And you don't stop them right there and say, "Well, we can't go on." Because remember, what we're doing here is we're looking to do two things. Number one, I'm looking to learn more about how to implement the steps into my life, and more about how to teach the steps to the people who come in behind us, because these two things are the most important things in our life. Let's just say our primary purpose is to stay sober and to help another alcoholic achieve sobriety. We stay sober by learning how to implement these steps into our lives, and we help another alcoholic achieve sobriety by trying to explain to them what it is that we're going through here. And one of the things that this is, where he says it's only a matter of being willing to believe, is the idea that you put that step 2 on hold and go on with the rest of the steps, and as a result of working the steps the way that they're outlined, you will receive what it is that they say you're going to get, which is a definite defense against that first drink, that obsession for that first drink will be removed, because the fear that is the underlying insanity that precedes that first drink will be at a manageable level that won't require you to have a drink to get rid of it. Anyway, that's a simple explanation from the way I understand it. So nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. Thus I was convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want Him enough. You see that key point there? When we want Him enough. That's got to be, because I got to tell you, I got a couple of guys that I've been working with, and you watch what they go through, and I say, man, I went through maybe I would say 2 years, 5 years of hell, but those last 2 years were like, I don't want to do it anymore, hell, you know. And I see them going through this for what they claim to be like 8 or 10 years of absolute. And the only thing I can come up with is when we want Him enough, because that's, to me, that was almost a turning point in my life. And I believe he may be making a reference to step 3, whereas in the big book it says we stood at the turning point. We asked for His protection and care with complete abandon. Because right here within another paragraph is the third step. Thus I was convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want Him enough. At long last I saw, I felt, I believed. Scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. A new world came into view. The real significance of my experience in the cathedral burst upon me. And remember, that's the very first page back there where he says he was going to battle, and he stepped into that Winchester Cathedral, and he had something flashed over him, and he got teary-eyed. And for a brief moment I had needed and wanted God. There had been a humble willingness to have Him with me, and He came. But soon the sense of His presence had been blotted out by worldly clamors, most of those within myself. Now you see that, you know what, when we get into the fourth step, and he's going to do this here in the next paragraph, when we get into the fourth step, you'll see that he actually says that the fourth step is a search to find the most common manifestations of self that block me from God's will, which is receiving and doing a life of service and self-sacrifice for others, work and self-sacrifice for others. So when he says that this is almost an explanation of what's keeping him from receiving and doing God's will or getting close to God. And when he says, there had been a humble willingness, I'm back on the other page over here. There had been a humble willingness to have Him with me, and He came. But soon the sense of His presence had been blotted out by worldly clamors, mostly those within myself. So that's an explanation of what we do in the fourth step. We're looking to find what these worldly clamors that are blotting out God that are within us, mostly within myself. And so it had been ever since. How blind I had been. At the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time. So remember, he was just talking about being at the kitchen table and talking to Ebby Thatcher, his old school friend. Now he's back in the hospital again. At the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise, for I showed signs of delirium tremens. I don't know if you guys have ever had that or seen it, but I've never had it, but I've seen it in other people, and it's pretty sad, man. So here's step 3, and about the next 4 pages, or 4 lines, I guess, 4 sentences. There I humbly offered myself to God, as I then understood Him, to do with me as He would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. So that's a pretty profound statement. Unreservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without him I was lost. Now I know he says sins in this next, but he goes on in the fourth step to actually the word sin is never mentioned again in this entire book, and in the 12 and 12 it is. But I've heard tales that we don't really deal with sin because here's why. Here's why we don't deal with sin in Alcoholics Anonymous. Because sin pertains to a particular religion. And when we say self, that's what we believe is blocking us from others, from doing things for others and living a life of service for others. So the whole idea of sin, what that'll do, it'll handicap you because you're going to be talking to somebody who is of Jewish religion or of Muslim religion or Buddhist or whatever other kind of religions there are out there that need help. And you're going to handicap yourself because you're sticking to the religion that you know and the sins that you're familiar with. So although he says here, I ruthlessly faced my sins, that's a reference to step 4, but there's a bigger reference below it. And it's after the fifth step. And he does jumble them around here in his story, and he also jumbles them around out in step 11, and there's another place he jumbles them around if I can remember it here. Let's see, he says, I ruthlessly faced my sins, and here's step 6 and 7, and became willing to have my newfound friend take them away, root and branch. I have not had a drink since. That was step 6 and 7. Here's where Ebby comes to him in the hospital. And remember, he's doing step 5 in the hospital, so it couldn't be more than a few days or a week or something that he's in the hospital doing the 5th step here. My schoolmate visited me, and I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies. So this is another reference to step 4 where he says, we made a list of people I had hurt or toward whom I felt resentment. So it's a list of people that we'd hurt and the people that we were angry about, and anything that we were angry about. People, institutions, and principles is the way it's outlined in the 4th step. So that was another reference to step 4, along with that other one, I ruthlessly faced my sins. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrong, steps 8 and 9. Never was I to be critical of them. I was to right all such matters to the utmost of my ability. Here's the description of step 10. I was cutting a lot of drywall today. It's still in my lungs. I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. And here's part of step 11, I guess. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as he would have me. Never was I to pray for myself, except as my request bore on my usefulness to others. Then only might I expect to receive, but that would be in great measure. So we're going to stop right there and open up the floor for open discussion, and we'll pick up where we left off right there. And a lot of that in the next page will all be step 12. My friend promised me when these things were done, so we'll pick up there next week. And Star Wars.
Is that where that came from?
Yoda.
I never heard Star Wars, and I've seen it like 40 times. I'll have to watch that.
Yeah, there's a lot of
That's
AA
the
in
other
there,
one,
man.
right? Probably. All right.
No, I'll answer it now. He had 4 years of sobriety. You got 3 years on him. From what I understood, he looked back on it in hindsight and said that it was all divinely inspired. That obviously Bill's story was one of the first things he wrote, and by the time he didn't write the 12 steps until he got to that page out on 59. When he was writing how it works, that's when he sat down one night and did it in like 30 minutes, I think it says. AA Comes of Age is one of the best books, I think. It's the second best book next to this one because it explains in a lot of detail how this book came to be and a lot of the things that are in here, where they got these ideas from, why we think they work, how they work. You look into this book and you go, I don't understand how that works, but in It Comes of Age, there's a lot of explanations in there that you're looking for. When the time comes that you're looking for those answers, that's the book that has the answers in it. It's Comes of Age. It's AA Comes of Age. It should be right there. It's essentially, when he says AA Comes of Age, he means essentially that the thousands of years of alcoholics with no defense, and finally our defense against alcoholism comes of age, and it's born. It's here. It has arrived. You understand?
So what does he mean? Common sense with thus
He'd probably tell you the same thing. I don't know. I had 4 years of sobriety. I was a stark raving lunatic on the edge of drinking. No.
Oh.
I don't know about you. When I had 4 years of sobriety, you don't want what I had. I don't recommend that, by the way.
One footnote that I
The thing to point out was where it said Debbie had only had 2 months of sobriety, and here he was alone, 12-stepping Bill Wilson in his kitchen. And it's also recommended. A lot of people go, "Hey, don't do it alone. Go with somebody." I don't know where they get that, but it's a one-on-one thing in 2 months. Anyway, next month or next week we'll pick up. I guess it will be next month, won't it? My schoolmate visited me, and this is Edwin Thatcher, the guy that he'd grown up with, and I fully acquainted him with my problems, step 5, and deficiencies. We made a list of people I had hurt, toward whom I had felt resentment, and that's the other half of step 4 here. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals. That would be like step 8. Admitting my wrong, step 9. Never was I to be critical of them. I was to write all such matters to the utmost of my ability. I was to test my new thinking. I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems, as he would have me. Step 10. Never was I to pray for myself, except as my request bore on my usefulness to others. I think I had somebody ask me last week where he says common sense would thus become uncommon sense. What does that mean? I have to be honest with you. I haven't given that a whole lot of thought, other than remember the idea that the whole basic idea of recovery is about that selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of our problem, and that selflessness and self-sacrifice for others is the spiritual solution. So they're literally, I always call them two opposite ends of the spectrum, like right and wrong, good and evil, selfishness and selflessness. That's the Alcoholics Anonymous program of recovery. And therefore, when he says common sense would thus become uncommon sense, he's sort of inverting the two. He's saying that there's an explanation out there somewhere about what do they call that? The spiritual experience, not the awakening thing. That's what's written on the board there, but that's the way he actually wrote it, was spiritual experience. And, I've also had people ask me what's the difference, and I said, I don't know. I think it's the same damn thing, actually, just two different ways of saying it. Spiritual experience, and they say where one person had a certain set of guides and ideals in which they lived their life by, was all of a sudden they've turned 180 degrees and were going in completely the opposite direction, and they had swapped one set that didn't work for one set that did. Therefore, that common sense would thus become uncommon sense, is almost like he's gone in the other direction, from one direction and turned around and went in a completely other direction. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, and this is like step 11, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as he would have me. Never was I to pray for myself, except as my request bore on my usefulness to others. Then only might I expect to receive, but that would be in great measure. There's a lot of... I see a lot of people do the prayer and meditation thing as if it's, and I did too. I thought it was like almost a connection between the real world in which we live in every day and the spiritual world where everybody who's dead goes, or wherever God is, or wherever all the other half of the existence, or whatever you might want to call it. That's what I always thought that was when they said, you're going to pray and meditate, somehow get in touch with the other spirit world or something. And my experience with it is that it's all right here, and how you get in touch with it. And it's a really good paragraph out in A Vision for You that says that though these men knew they must help other alcoholics if they would remain sober, that motive becomes secondary. If you want to see it, we'll go out there real quick. And it's one of the most profound things that I know of in this book, because it really does explain in a real world way what it is that I feel when I live the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's... I'll get you the page here. Page 159. Page 159, right in the middle of the page there. And once again, this is the same story that's repeated over and over again. Bill Wilson is on the verge of a drink. It's it. His sobriety is over. He's got 6 months of sobriety. It's gone. He is going to drink that night. And what does he do? He finds another alcoholic to help with. And this says, all this time, this is like the second paragraph down, 2.5 paragraphs, what do you want to call it? All this time, our friend of the hotel lobby incident, in which Bill almost drank, remained in that town, Akron, Ohio. He was there for 3 months. So that gives Bill Wilson 9 months of sobriety there. He now returned home, leaving behind his first acquaintance, Dr. Bob, the lawyer, which is Bill Dobson, and the devil may care chap, that AA number 4 guy. These men had found something brand new in life. And this is the part I was getting to, is this next 3 or 4 lines right here. Though they knew they must help other alcoholics if they would remain sober, that motive became secondary. It was transcended by the happiness they found in giving themselves for others. And what that means to me is my conscious contact with God is based on what I do for God, what I do in my daily life. When I do something that I perceive as being done for the God of my understanding, it makes me feel closer to God. It makes me feel it is transcended by the happiness they found in giving themselves for others. And it's sort of like in going back to the promises of the 9th step, where he says that we will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. And what he's essentially saying there is that I'm going to have this intuitive, I'm going to get this gut feeling, as so to speak, on how to react to things that happen to me. And what I'm doing is I'm teaching my subconscious self how to react to these things in the future. Just like when we teach ourselves when we're angry, we must react with forgiveness, and we're going to practice that principle in all our affairs in order to teach our subconscious selves how to forgive when we're angry. And we're going to get better and better and better at it over years, at getting to the anger before it becomes a festering wound in our head and becomes a fist fight and we end up screaming at somebody or something. We're going to, over the period of time, and that's exactly what's happening when I'm helping other alcoholics. I'm going to teach this is faith in God, like it says here. The reference that we see, faith without works is dead, refers to step 12. If your faith without works is dead and you're not helping others through step 12, where is your faith in God? It's dead. And that, too, is what we're talking about, is how close I feel to the God of this world. And it's, I see people turning the lights out, and they light candles, and they play whale songs. That happened over at the the 101 Club one night. They were actually playing whale songs. And I was sitting there, I was starting to laugh, and I started to giggle at first, and I started to laugh, and I had to get up and leave because I was, disrupting their meeting. But, to me, it seems like it's a simple idea. Back to how close I feel to God is in direct proportion to what I do for God. And what do we do for God? We help bring others to God through the 12 steps and the spiritual solutions of forgiveness, making amends, and faith in God. Those are the 3 spiritual solutions that we have. My friend promised when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator. You see what he's saying there? He's saying that when I live forgiveness to get rid of to deal with my anger, when I live making amends to deal with my guilts for what I do to other people, and when I live faith in God of helping others through the 12 steps, this is how I'm going to get close to God. My friend promised when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator, that I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all my problems. All of my problems. There's only 3 spiritual solutions that we have to worry about: forgiveness, making amends, and faith in God. Because remember out in the 4th step where he says, from this stem all other forms of spiritual disease. And when we straighten out spiritually, we straighten out mentally and physically. Belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements. Now look what he says here. Simple, but not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. That's one of my favorite quotes in this whole book. I must turn in all things. And that means my heartbeat, my breathing, and all the little things that are happening in my life. I like to think that I'm in charge, but the truth of the matter is God is in charge of all things. These were revolutionary and drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory, followed by such a peace and serenity as I had never known. There was utter confidence. Sorry. I felt lifted up as though the great, clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound. You know, that's Bill Wilson's description of his spiritual experience, the spiritual awakening or whatever. But, you know, spiritual experience is actually written like 5 times in the book, and spiritual awakening was written once, and it was changed from spiritual experience the way that Bill originally wrote it. But there's a... I'm going to find it one of these days. 90% of all alcoholics have the gradual, educated variety of spiritual experience, and 10% have Bill Wilson's sudden and profound. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound. For a moment I was alarmed and called my friend the doctor, Dr. Silkworth, to ask if I were still sane. He listened in wonder as I talked. Finally he shook his head, saying, "Something has happened to you. I don't understand. But you had better hang on to it. Anything is better than the way you were." The good doctor now sees many men who've had such experiences. You know that while he was still in the hospital here, that Ebby Thatcher, his schoolyard friend, Edwin, had brought him that book that was given to Edwin Thatcher by, and there's a letter that Bill wrote in, I believe it's this one up here, The Language of the Heart, that Bill wrote to Dr. Carl Jung, one of the what he calls one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, actually, because of that book, and it helped Bill Wilson understand the nature of the spiritual experience that he had had. It was Varieties of Religious Experience by William James, and it was given to him by Ebby while he was in the hospital bed here. Let's see. Finally, he shook his head, saying something had happened. Let me see what it was. The good doctor now sees many men who've had such experiences. He knows that they are real. While I lay in the hospital, so you see, he's still in the hospital now, and he's done step 11. He's gone up to step 11, and he's fixing to get the idea of step 12 in his head while he's still in the hospital bed. Wait a minute. While I lay in the hospital, the thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They, in turn, might work with others. I don't know where that came from, because I got to tell you, if I was laying in that hospital bed, that never would have come to me. My friend had emphasized, because I believe there's some stuff that's left out here, like probably Ebby had told him about the Oxford groups a lot more than what he's hinting on to here, that the Oxford groups had saved him by sending him out to help others. And that was what Ebby was doing there. He actually showed up there because Ebby was thinking to himself, you know, they're telling me to find somebody to help. Oh, I know, Bill Wilson. He's one of my old drinking buddies from school. I'm going to go over his house. That's how Ebby ended up over there. They sent him over there. This is Bill's step 12 here. This is one of my favorite things to read here, too. And then I'll open up the meeting a few more minutes here. My friend had emphasized the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. Of course, we see that in step 12, practice these principles in all our affairs. And you know, one of the things that I almost can't stand that word anymore, because people are out there going brotherly love and hope and open-mindedness, and those things are great, but that is not the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. When he says demonstrating these principles in all my affairs, he's talking about doing the inventory in all your affairs, finding when you are angry and applying forgiveness to it. He's talking about finding when you're afraid in all of the affairs of your life. Find out where you're afraid and apply faith to that. And whenever you've harmed other people in anything that you do, you find out what you've done to hurt them and you make amends. And those are the principles that they're talking about practicing in all your affairs. Particularly was it imperative to work with others as he had worked with me, because this is the whole core of this, is that it's rooted in fear, and our combat, how we combat fear is through faith in God. And remember, once again, that faith in God is essentially working with other alcoholics. That is what faith in God is, and it's referred to many times in here. Particularly was it imperative to work with others as he had worked with me. Faith without works was dead, he said, and how appallingly true for the alcoholic. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life, So how we perfect and enlarge our spiritual life is through work and self-sacrifice for others. And how that works is, it's what I think that God wants me to do, and it makes me feel. When we went out there to A Vision for You, and he said, it's transcended by the happiness they find in giving themselves for others. So essentially, it as my sponsor would put it, it really is this simple. He says, when you do good, you're going to feel good. And when you do bad, you're going to feel bad. And by doing things for others and not expecting anything in return, primarily, this is one of the most profound things that I've experienced in my life, is that when I teach other people about the God of this world, and it is not me, I am nothing without God. Remember what he said? He says, there I humbly offered myself to God as I then understood him to do with me as he would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. This is what I was getting to. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without him I was lost. Of myself I was nothing. So that's what that does. That reaffirms that I am not the God of this world, and that without the God of this world I am nothing. And a continued source of this is to go around teaching other people this over and over and over. And remember, we don't teach religion. What we teach is this 12 steps to whatever God or higher power it is that you feel is running this place, to get in touch with whatever's running this place. And what that does for me is that it gives me a sense of ego deflation. It helps me to remember that what one of the doctors, Dr. Harry Tiebout, had said was he had noticed that the alcoholics had this incredible ego that had this remarkable ability to restore its former glory. That these alcoholics come into their hospital smashed, broken people. They don't want to go on, and 2 weeks later they're on top of their game again. They're king of the world, and they're God of this world again. And what the alcoholic does is he stays on top of that. And we that's why one of the things they say is that they favor hospitalization, and they also favor getting to the alcoholic right in the hospital, right out of the gate, and getting them before they start getting their ego coming back up. Because your ego gets smashed, and then it starts through the natural healing process. The ego must restore itself, and we try to keep that ego from restoring its former glory. And that is how that happens for us, is we teach others about the God of this world. It reminds us that we're not it. For others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. If he did not work, he would surely drink again, and if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. With us, it is just like that. So here's my wife and I abandoned ourselves. Him and his wife both set out. Remember out there in the chapter to wives, one of the things that somebody taught me was all those chapters out there, the chapter to wives, the family afterward, to employers. I used to always look at those chapters and go, what the hell do I want to read that for? It's the chapter to employers. I don't employ anyone. It's a chapter to wives. I'm not a wife. And what those chapters are saying is just like the Oxford group said, that the 12 steps are for everyone, including the wives. And here he is saying that him and his wife both set out to help other alcoholics. She's right there with him. And that's how she ended up starting that Al-Anon thing. My wife and I abandoned ourselves with enthusiasm to the idea of helping other alcoholics to a solution of their problems. It was fortunate for my old business associates remained skeptical for a year and a half, during which I found little work. I was not too well at the time and was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. This sometimes nearly drove me back to drink, but I soon found that when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. That's very profound right there, huh? So here's Bill Wilson with some time under his belt here, and he was plagued. Well, this is within his first 6 months, I would guess, before he met Dr. Bob. He was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment, but he was still on this path of getting closer to God, even though one of the things out in the 11th step says, suppose we fall short of this. Suppose we fall short of this ideal. Does this mean we're going to get drunk? And he says, no, as long as our motives are right, that if you do end up getting into a fist fight with somebody, it doesn't mean you're going to get drunk tonight. What it means is you need to redouble your efforts at learning how to get rid of this anger before it gets to us. This sometimes nearly drove me back to drink, but I soon found that when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. So that's the basic teaching. We're going to open up the floor. We're going to stop right there with work with another alcoholic would save the day. When all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. That is the basic message. You know, whenever I go to an AA meeting, too, I never go, gee, I wonder what I'm going to say today. Well, I'm going to tell everybody about my problems. Am I going to tell them about my life? I had a flat tire today. Something's going wrong here. Something's going wrong there. Whatever it might be. I had an argument with the boss or whatever. No, I'm going to tell them that work with another alcoholic will save the day. It's a message I always take to all AA meetings. I always say, one of the ideas about getting out of self is just that idea itself. That getting out of self really means get out of self, not sitting around talking about it, not thinking about it, but go out and do it. And so, too, does the idea that going to a meeting and telling everybody my problems just gets deeper and deeper into my problems. They're stewing further and further into my head. Or I go to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting and talk about God, spirituality, the solutions, the big book, what the details of the steps. That was one of the things that really attracted me to some of the people that I was following around, going, hey, what can I learn from this person? What can I learn from that one? Was people started giving me details about the steps, and that was something I hadn't experienced before. I had heard a lot of vague descriptions and references to, I heard people, let me give you an example. I heard people make reference to helping others in the same voice that they would say, push in chairs and make the coffee. Pushing in chairs and making a coffee ain't going to keep you sober. Helping others, helping other alcoholics and helping them through the 12 steps and implementing those 12 steps into your daily life, that's going to keep you sober. And here they're going, you can empty the ashtrays, I don't know, make some coffee, help others, whatever you want to do, But no, it's not that. You help others or fall by the wayside and be one of those people that go, did you hear about so-and-so? Yeah, he drank. Gee, I wonder how that happened. Now, you have to ask yourself a question, and I know I did. I said, why does working with another alcoholic save the day? What's to that? How exactly does that work? Is that too difficult a question, or is it like spiritual calculus, as they say? And it's beyond my ability to comprehend the idea that this sometimes nearly drove me back to drink, but I soon found that when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. And, we went out to that chapter in the end out there, A Vision for You, where he says that though these men knew they must help other alcoholics if they would remain sober, that motive becomes secondary, and it is transcended by the happiness they find in giving themselves for others. And the way I understand it is this, the unconditional love deal is that you do something for someone else and do not place any conditions on it. And from that, you will feel better about who you are on the end. They say it's an inside job. You got to get to the inside. And many times I hear people make reference to, I do this for these people and I do that for those people, and then they follow it up with, but no one ever appreciates me and they don't ever give me the credit due or something. And that's the breaking point for doing something for somebody else. When you're expecting something in return from them for what you've done, it cancels it out as something that's a selfless act. But here in Alcoholics Anonymous, we do things, and I see a lot of that too in sponsors and sponsees where you almost got where like a sponsor has got his sponsee dependent upon them. Call me every day. Don't make any decisions and without calling me first. I'll tell you when you can make these decisions. No relationships for the first year. And what that is that's the sponsor putting conditions on whether he will help this person. They'll say, well, you forgot to call me a couple of times and you got into a relationship, you're fired. And what are you doing? You're just fired your sobriety. And those are conditions that people are placing on other people. And they don't understand the idea of, one of the things that I've seen that Bill Wilson writes a lot of is he has to keep reminding himself, because his ego wants to restore itself and say, look at me, I'm the great AA guy. I got all these people I'm helping and all these people I'm like famous in AA, and he has to keep reminding himself how lucky he is to have the opportunity to help others, because it wasn't just a few short weeks, months, years ago, decades with some of us, For me, it's been almost two decades next week. It'll be 2 decades since I had a drink, and I have to keep reminding myself that I am lucky, I'm fortunate to be given this opportunity to help other people. Because, when I was drunk and I said, hey, let me help you with that, people go, get the hell away from me, you drunken bum, But anyway, you can easily see how your ego would keep coming back there. But anyway, I was just getting into that because Why does working with another alcoholic save the day? Because remember about the idea of self-sacrifice, giving of yourself freely, the unconditional love that's spoken of. And, you know, I don't know about you guys, but there's not a whole lot of unconditional love in my life. It just isn't. I'm working on it, though. I mean, anyway, many times I have gone to my old hospital in despair. On talking to a man there, I would be amazingly lifted up and set on my feet. It was a design for living that works in rough going. And that's the basic idea behind that, behind helping others, is that you don't place conditions on it. And as my sponsor would say, when you do good things, you're going to feel good about who you are on the inside. And when somebody says, hey, buddy, you want to drink alcohol? How you react to that first drink. And that's what we're talking about, building a defense against the first drink, knowing that you can never again safely take one drink without it leading to another debacle, without another drunk, about another, you know, losing everything in jail again. But so our defense comes against the first drink, and that defense comes in the form of how we feel about who we are. That's what my sponsor used to always say. So what was so wrong with the way that you were feeling that you had to turn to alcohol to kill that pain? Anyway, we commenced to make many fast friends, and a fellowship has grown up among us, of which it is a wonderful thing to feel a part. The joy of living, you see how he's saying that? It's a wonderful thing to feel a part of that, instead of that you know, that knot in your stomach when you reach for a drink. I got to have a drink. The joy of living we really have, even under pressure and difficulty. I have seen hundreds of families set their feet in the path that really goes somewhere, have seen the most impossible domestic situations righted, feuds and bitterness of all sorts wiped out. I have seen men come out of asylums and resume a vital place in their lives, in the lives of their families and communities. Business and professional men have regained their standing. There is scarcely any form of trouble and misery which has not been overcome among us. In one western city and its environs, there are 1,000 of us and our families. I don't know why he says 1,000 right there, because repeatedly in this book it's written, maybe he was just being optimistic for the future, but in this book it's repeatedly, we are 100 men and women who wrote this book. It's more than once that's actually in there. So he's just being optimistic there when he says thousands. He may have been making a reference to Cleveland, because Cleveland was, I know he's probably making a reference to Akron, but Cleveland was the group that was largely responsible. Do you want to say something, Bill?
The only thing I'm thinking is that he's counting the family.
Yeah. Thousands of us and our family. That could be, yeah. One, for each one alcoholic, there's 3 or 4 other people. Yeah. That still only comes to about 500. He was just being optimistic. He's a real optimistic guy, you know. We meet frequently so that newcomers may find the fellowship they seek. At these informal gatherings, one may often see from 50 to 200 persons. We are growing in numbers and power. There's an asterisk right there, down at the bottom of the page. In 1988, AA is composed of approximately 73,000 groups. An alcoholic in his cups is an unlovely creature. Our struggles with them are variously strenuous, comic, and tragic. One poor chap committed suicide in my home. He could not or would not see our way of life. There is, however, a vast amount of fun about it all. I suppose some would be shocked at our seeming worldliness and levity, but just underneath there's a deadly earnestness. Faith has to work 24 hours a day in and through us, or we perish. So that's a pretty profound statement right there, that faith has to work 24 hours a day in and through us, or we perish. And what he's making a reference to there is helping others and thinking of others. That is the definition of faith for us in Alcoholics Anonymous. Faith without works is dead, and what we do is we bring others to God. Most of us feel we need to look no further for utopia. We have it with us right here and now. Each day, my friend's simple talk in our kitchen multiplies itself in a widening circle of peace on earth and goodwill to men. Bill W., co-founder of AA, died January 24th, 1971, right here in Miami, if you didn't know that. They buried him in Connecticut up there, but or where did they bury him? He's in Connecticut, or? Pretty sure, yeah. He's not here in Florida, I know that. But he lived here in Miami when he died. Okay, so we're going to go on to There Is a Solution, Chapter 2. And there's a lot of good stuff in here. A lot of first step stuff. A lot of explanation of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so we'll try to get a couple of pages of this under our belt here. So Chapter 2, There Is a Solution, page 17. We of Alcoholics Anonymous know thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. Nearly all have recovered. They have solved the drink problem. So, throughout this book, you see the phrase "we," and once again, I hear people make reference. The reason I'm saying this is, and I'll tell you why, is because in the chapter How It Works, he says no human power could relieve our alcoholism. A, B, and C, and that God could and would have. Well, the idea that no human power could relieve our alcoholism, and the point being that some people come in here and they don't want to give in to the God thing, so they say get people's numbers and get a support group and call people. And, you know, they forget to add in there that when you call these people that they're going to be pointing you towards these spiritual solutions, toward the program of action, to the things that we do in AA. And what they get is they get the whole idea that just like in the rehab or the detox or the halfway house, where it's almost like one alcoholic dependent upon another, almost like, let me see, out in the chapter Working with Others, there's a reference made, maybe it's in Bill's or Dr. Bob's Nightmare, but in one of those chapters there's a reference made that the minute we get these alcoholics dependent upon us, it's in Working with Others, the chapter Working with Others. The minute we get these alcoholics dependent upon us rather than a higher power, then that makes that, you know, that it's kind of like one human being dependent upon another human being instead of one human being dependent upon God. And that's the wrong idea, is that, you know, that one human being can be, you know, like I was saying a minute ago, where sponsors will say, you know, hey, you call me with any important decisions, and I tell you what, I got 20 years, and somebody says, you know, hey, they're going to call me with an important decision, and I'm not going to answer it. I'm going to say, look, you need to, we'll show you the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, to where we do the inventories, find our fear, find our anger, and find our guilt, and we apply those three spiritual solutions of forgiveness when we're angry, faith in God when we're afraid, and amends when we feel guilty for what we've done. Those are the three spiritual solutions outlined out there in the 4 through 9, actually. But what happens over the years, I had become sort of, you know, your ego gets bigger, and you want to do what I was just saying. You want other people, you want to give people the answers, and you want to tell them, hey, but that's the wrong thing for both people involved, both me and my ego and them and their dependence upon a higher power. So anyway, that's what the we thing, whenever you say, you know, it's a we program, know that it means we of Alcoholics Anonymous, the first 100 that wrote this book, and that it is not a human being calling another human being other than for the directions on how to get in touch with God. There's sort of a middleman between you and God, not your dependence for sobriety. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that, and all I can say is it's not. It's nothing more than people who can't transmit something that they haven't got. And I used to get angry about it, and now I think it's more sad than anything, you know, and I try to put the record straight on something like that. We are average Americans. All sections of this country and many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. We are people who normally would not mix, but there exists among us a fellowship of friendliness and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. We are like the passengers. You know, there's a lot of analogies he gives in here. Like in the 4th step, he gives you an analogy of a person who owns a business. And if that person is to be successful, he must take an inventory of what he has in order to know what's selling, what's not selling. And there's another analogy of a jaywalker who keeps skipping out in front of us to get that high, to get that junkie, to get that adrenaline rush of running in front of these moving trolley cars. And this is one of the ones that I like the best, because this is an analogy of why one alcoholic can get through to another alcoholic like no other can, because we feel connected to one another. Whether you want to admit it or not, alcoholics, when we're when we're either drunk or sober, we feel connected to each other because we don't feel like an outcast, like somebody's been speaking down to us. And anyway, we are like the passengers of a great liner at the moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. Unlike the feeling of the ship's passengers, however, our joy and escape from disaster does not subside as we go our individual ways. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us. But that in itself would have never held us together as we are now joined. And now this next paragraph here, subparagraph, I guess you'd call it, it's not a very big one, but this is very profound. One of the most profound statements in the entire book. He says that the tremendous fact for every one of us, and how profound is that? The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. This is not a different solution for the Wall Street broker, for the doctor in Akron, for anybody at all. The carpenter from here in South Florida, anybody in the United States, men and women. It's not different for women. It's the same spiritual program for women as it is for men. A common solution. We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. So there's a tremendous fact for every one of us. We have discovered a common solution. We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree upon. And this is the great news this book carries. An illness of this sort, and we have come to believe it an illness, involved those about us in a way no other human sickness can. If a person has cancer, all are sorry for him and no one is angry or hurt. But not so with the alcoholic illness. For with it there goes annihilation of all things worthwhile in life. It engulfs all those whose lives touch the sufferers. It brings misunderstanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children, sad wives and parents. Anyone can increase the list. We hope this volume will inform and comfort those who are or may be affected. There are many. Highly competent psychiatrists who have dealt with us have found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss his situation without reserve. Strangely enough, wives, parents, and intimate friends usually find us even more unapproachable than do the psychiatrist and the doctor. But the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who is properly armed with the facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. One of the things I started this transition in my own personal life here. I used to do like everybody else. Someone would say, would you share in a meeting? And I'd speak in that meeting for 30 minutes, and I'd tell everybody about how much I drank, where I grew up, when I was born. I couldn't stand it. I hated it. And one day I heard somebody else do nothing but the steps, so I started sharing nothing but the steps. And I went to my sponsor one day, and I said, hey, how'd I do? My sponsor was at one of the meetings when I was sharing. I did nothing but the steps. I didn't talk about myself or anything. And he said, it's important, just like in Bill's story and Dr. Bob's story and all the stories in the back of the book, if you'll look in there, the first half of the story is it's more like the first 2/3 of the story is drunkalogue, to win, like he says, to win the confidence of these alcoholics so that they know that they're being spoken to by another alcoholic, a real one of us sort of guy, and not some average Joe who's so bored with his life that he got nothing else to do but come and sit and hang out in an AA meeting. But this is a real alcoholic. So that's the importance of, but I still tend to whittle my drunkalogue, if you would, down to some simple stuff like I lied and stole from the people who cared about me the most in my life. And you can imagine what I did to all the other people after that. And I throw a couple of other things in there, like I was on a first name basis with the booking deputies in the county jail, and that's not to get a laugh. I'm serious. I knew the first names of the deputies that used to book me into the county jail But anyway, the point being that you got to win the confidence of alcoholics too, so that they don't think that they're just being spoken down to by somebody who doesn't know what the hell they're going through, you know. And that's one of the reasons Alcoholics Anonymous is so successful. And one of the reasons why Bill Wilson gave for them breaking away from the Oxford groups when we were part of the Oxford groups, and they kept saying, "No, you got to stop focusing on alcoholics, Bill." And Bob, at the time, I think Bob was more of a part of the Oxford groups for almost 2.5 years, and Bill was only there for like 6 months or so with the Oxford groups. But anyway, when they started breaking away after the first couple of years, they sort of, no hard feelings, but you know, it was definitely anyway. That the man who was making the approach has had the same difficulty, that he obviously knows what he is talking about, that his whole deportment shouts at the new prospect that he is a man with a real answer. He has no attitude of holier than thou, nothing whatever except a sincere desire to be helpful, that there are no fees to pay, no axes to grind, no people to please, no lectures to be endured. These are conditions we have found most effective. After such an approach, many take up their beds and walk again. So that's a pretty good list right there. That holier than thou thing, that there is no attitude of holier than thou, nothing whatever, except for a sincere desire to be helpful. And I have to tell you, occasionally I have to conjure up my sincere desire to be helpful with a little bit of threat of alcoholism knocking at the back door to get me going. You know, I have to remind myself of. But I'm sure that everybody's like that. I don't think there's probably very few people who don't start to slack off and remind themselves, look, you better get going again, or you're going to end up one of those people who comes in here and going, I don't know what happened. One day I was sober and the next day I was drunk. Okay. These are conditions. Oh, here we go. None of us makes sole vocation of this work, nor do we think its effectiveness would be increased if we did. We feel that the elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. A much more important demonstration of our principles lies before us in our prospective homes, occupations, and affairs. Now, when he says principles there, I've come to know that as my forgiveness, my faith in God, and my amends, because, you know, they've got that whole principles behind the steps things, and that thing is so, it's done more damage to Alcoholics Anonymous, I believe, than just about anything I can think of. Or, you know, anybody breaking their anonymity on the level of press, radio, and films. I know there's a guy out there right now who's in the press. I don't know if you guys have noticed it or not, but he's breaking his anonymity constantly, and it doesn't bother me at all. He did it like yesterday. I was watching it yesterday, and he says, I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. These are the 12 steps, and this is what we do. And I'm going, geez, the whole country just saw him break his anonymity on channel whatever it was, 32 or whatever it was. But anyway, when he says the principles lie before us in our respective homes, occupations, and I always see that now as my ability to forgive, because that is the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. When you get down into the meat and potatoes, there are really only 3 of these principles that they speak of, and they are faith in God, making amends, and forgiveness when we're angry. And we'll get into that when we get out there into the chapter of how it works, when the meat and the potatoes are the steps, you know, the inventory and the solutions. All of us spend much of our spare time in the sort of effort which we are going to describe. A few are fortunate enough to be so situated that they can give nearly all their time to the work. If we keep on the way we are going, there is little doubt that much good will result, but the surface of the problem would hardly be scratched. Those of us who live in large cities are overcome by the reflection that close by hundreds are dropping into oblivion every day. Many could recover if they had the opportunity we have enjoyed. How then shall we present that which has been so freely given us? You know, one thing, when we read this book, keep in mind, going out to the chapter of Vision for You, I'll tell you what, I'm going to take you out there and show you just for a minute, so you don't think I'm just blowing smoke. We'll go into a Vision for You where I'm going to show you where he's only talking about the idea is that this book is your sponsor. And you're in a faraway city or a faraway land, and there is no one alcoholic working with another. You don't have the opportunity of a sponsor because nobody else. Remember that this book was written in 1939, and in 1939, Alcoholics Anonymous was just getting started, and there was an argument that went on for the writing of the book. One side of the argument was, if we write a book, then it's no longer one alcoholic working with another. But if it's one alcoholic working with another, it's not going to get to Japan or get to Korea or around the world or the Philippines where all the servicemen were, or anywhere else in the, like Russia where they need it. I guess they're still needing it pretty bad over there. It's not going to get around the world for decades. It'll be in the 1970s before it even gets to California. So they made the argument that, yeah, we're going to write the book. But out in this chapter of Vision for You, on page 163, you see, this book is trying to egg you on to go help others. And in the chapter Working with Others, he says you can easily find some people to work with. Just find some doctors, hospitals, sanitariums, priests, ministers, or rabbis, and that these people will be more than glad to help you find some drunks in your neighborhood, in your area that you can help. Okay, so he's trying to give you the idea that if you want to get sober and you have no sponsor, no AA meetings, you just go right out there and find some alcoholics to help. So on the bottom of 162, top of 163, he says, thus we grow, talking about the Alcoholics Anonymous program, thus we grow, and so can you. Though you be but one man with this book in your hand, we believe and hope it contains all you will need to begin. We know what you're thinking. You're saying to yourself, I'm jittery and alone. No sponsor, no AA program. You with one man with this book in your